the job roles arising from our decarbonization. Yeah. When the levers that I focus on in my area, industrialization as a key lever, and how do we enable industrialization, similar to what Marley was mentioning, in terms of looking at emerging value chain and how we can look at industrialization on the value chain.
There could be a in-house like learning session. That's always comes up.
Okay, we're gonna get started with the next session. We'd like to just now get into a focused discussion around the just transition and the labor market. So if you've seen from the program, the idea is really to narrow down the issues until we get into the actual code of good practice in terms of proposals. But before then, we just wanted to paint a picture with regards to the just transition as well as the labor market in South Africa. All right. So it's always good to start from the framework for a just transition in South Africa. I think a lot of you can agree that prior to the development of this document, we really didn't have a shared vision and shared understanding of what a just transition really looks like. And if you've worked on this issue for quite some time, you will also recall that prior to this particular framework, there was a lot of fragmentation in terms of understanding, interpretation, as well as just how we go about achieving the just transition in South Africa. Also because the just transition is very much context specific, right? So the Germans are great, they've done wonderful stuff, but we could not replicate how the Germans went about their transition. South Africa has very specific challenges that it deals with on a day-to-day basis, and those need to be taken into consideration as we transition. I think something else to also take stock of that, coming together and having this unified vision through the framework for a just transition in South Africa has been very helpful. In a lot of papers, in a lot of initiatives, this framework is often referenced because across the various government departments, across the various social partners, there's just been a broad adoption of the framework as well as its articulation of what we mean by a just transition. So at its core, really, this framework has been about defining what the transition is, as well as the real needs for equitable distributions of risks as well as responsibilities, again, located in the context of historical liabilities for climate catastrophes in South Africa. At its core, South Africa's just transition has embodied an inclusive approach. So this is also kind of why we're having these roundtables as we move towards the development of a code of good practice, because inclusiveness is really important so that the creative energies, views can be tapped into of all social partners as we move forward. This framework has also been, and this was done deliberately, around the needs for the active support that's needed for workers as well as communities that are affected by mitigation. This has been important because, we've lived through our fair share of transitions. And one thing experience will teach you is that there is a sense that transitions, whether, and it doesn't matter how or when they come about, but at its core and a byproduct is really a creation of a lot of losers, which have often been workers and communities, and very few winners. And if you juxtapose that in a country like ours that has serious inequality challenges, this transition seeks to be different, especially in terms of ensuring that there's equitable distribution of, yes, the wins, but as well as the losses. So really what this and the ILO presentation and even the IDC's presentation as well have touched on the importance of recognizing the opportunity that is also in front of us. And that opportunity is one of structural economic change. And in order to get the best sort of outputs of that, how you design your transition is really important. So that just touches on the just transition framework in South Africa, and really the importance of having such a document. So Lwandle and Matilda did touch on this, that an additional sort of benefit of having the framework has been around the articulation of the principles for a just transition for South Africa. I've seen a number of other frameworks and documents for other countries, and they touch on some of the justices and principles that South Africa has recognized. But again, because the just transition is so context specific, it may differ to some extent. But for the South African case, again, distributive justice is really important. And again, this is related to equity and equitable distribution of risks and responsibilities. Restorative justice that touches on issues related to redress of historical damages, and colleagues in the room will recognize that for the South African context post 1994, this has been really important. But when you look at it from the point of view of physical damages as a result of climate change, it becomes important to rectify damages and to restore communities as well as the environment. And then issues related to procedural justice. And really what it's all about is how do you empower workers, communities, and small businesses so that they too can define their own development pathways, and they can also shape how decisions are being made. I mean, we all know that whoever has the biggest influence drives certain agendas, and the just transition is meant to be a bit different in the sense that, you know, the views of those that are most affected and the views of those that have important roles to play in the transition are given an opportunity to shape how decisions are made. One of the things that I've been saying in the previous roundtables is that what's great about frameworks is that they say everything, and they are very high level aspirational documents. What then becomes the challenge is the how to. So how do you practically achieve distributive justice, restorative justice, as well as procedural justice? Unfortunately, a framework would not be able to address that. So if we look at South Africa's just transition path or landscape, so to say, what you'll know is that, you know, a lot has been said in terms of intention and commitment. But when you look at actual implementation, we've had a number of experiences depending on who you speak to. So and this is the PCC's view, is that we are probably at the right time to, at a practical point of view, start to define and set aside steps, norms, and standards at a minimum or at a minimum standard or minimum level, define what these three justices really look like. And you'll see Lisa Seftel is the service provider that's helping us craft the code of good practice together with Professor Paul Benjamin, who's no stranger to the development of codes of practices. He's been doing it for ages. And what they've really been looking at is at a minimum level, how does distributive justice as well as procedural justice look like at the workplace level, and we could potentially stretch it to what it looks like at community. And the idea is if we start to harmonize interventions, and this is when we start to see broader impact for the people at the ground. Now, again, this comes from the Just Transition framework again, but it really comes down to the fact that to realize a just transition, several areas of planning need our simultaneous focus. So colleagues will know the Code of Good Practice is very much a labor market tool, right? So it takes us to the first intervention around the labor market. And you'll see how this plays itself out when Lisa does her presentation. But a code of good practice under the Labor Relations Act is a labor market tool. But you will also appreciate the fact that you need additional responses over and above labor market tools. You need to do something to realize economic diversification. You need to say something around issues related to social support. You need to do something with regard to governance as well as climate finance. All of these work together for us to achieve the just transition. And again, when Lisa does her presentation, you will see how all of these pillars can potentially work together in a coordinated and streamlined manner, beginning though from the code of good practice. There are things that can go into the code, and again, I'm going to let Lisa have a chance to go through those. And there are things that can't, so things that relate to economic diversification, social support, governance, and even climate finance would not go into a code of good practice. But again, they are important for us to realize the just transition. So through a process of practical guidance, these could be interventions that support the development of the code of good practice. Now, I think I'm speaking to the converted here in the room, but just to reiterate the point, and Matilda in her presentation would have touched on this, around our acute exposure to the unequal impact of the physical climate risk. So everyone in the room would know that because of our location in sub-Saharan Africa, we are roughly going to experience warming at twice the global average rate. Okay. So that has an impact on infrastructure development. That has an impact on building a resilient economy. That has an impact on adaptation. Again, speaking to the converted here, we can only develop as fast and as well as we build our infrastructure. And if our infrastructure is continuously being washed away, that creates significant challenges in terms of infrastructure development, which has a direct bearing on economic growth. So these are the things that we need to take into consideration. And let me just say this. I've made reference to the global average, so the global warming average rate. So basically, what it says is that this is a global initiative, and keeping warming at hopefully we can still do it well below 2 degrees, if not 1.5, is particularly in the best interest of a country like ours, specifically when we take into consideration the impacts of physical climate risk as well as economic development. I didn't put this in the previous slides or the previous roundtables, but I just thought it would be good for us to reflect on this. And Lwandle talked about it quite a bit, right? That, the failure, and it's just, this one is actually quite specifically to the South African context, actually. So the failure to act on climate change and the failure for us to transition in a manner that is manageable for our economy will make our economy less competitive, particularly when trading partners shift consumption patterns. So I'm specific about the words that I'm using. I'm not saying if they're going to move away, it's when. Particularly when we take into consideration our various trading partners, our biggest one being the European Union, and their various net zero dates, right? So you've got our major trading partner prioritizing net zero by 2050, the Chinese 2060. But countries have net zero dates, and I think the previous sort of iteration of NDC from NDC targets from the various countries. Yes, unambitious if you were to follow the climate action tracker. But what they have shown in terms of signals is, that they are pursuing net zero, and they've defined the dates in which they are pursuing net zero. I mean, our conversation for the large part of this morning has been about, a number of sectors. But if we were to look or zero in on the issues related to particularly coal exports, and bearing in mind that now our coal exports are going in the direction of the east, but sort of net zero dates are really important to take into consideration because that tells us for how long we can continue to export coal into those regions. Because like us, they are also shifting their economies, and they are also making sure that they remain competitive, also aligning themselves to specific shifts in terms of consumption patterns. Okay, yeah. Matilda, you were not exaggerating. This does go quite quickly. Okay. Then it goes haywire. Okay, let's see. Okay, I pressed too hard. Again, Lwandle made the point around the export of ICE vehicles currently being at risk. And what you can see is that, especially when we look at the European Union, which is our major trading partner, there are specific timeframes in terms of when there will be a stop in terms of internal combustion engines or our ability to export internal combustion engines. So we're looking at I did see the discussion in the European Parliament over the festive break, but safe to say that we're looking at least 2035 to start preparing ourselves in terms of the shift, in terms of the export of ICE vehicles. And let me just put this disclaimer. So none of this is presented to fear monger. That's not the intention. An economy that's as open as ours, that is vulnerable to the shocks and global shifts that take place in other parts of the world, are important for us to take into consideration. You don't boost your competitiveness by ignoring what's happening in other localities. And then, I mean, there's always conversations about improving sort of intra-African trade, and that's really commendable. These things, however, do take time, but it's also important to know what your major trading partner is currently thinking in terms of their industrial development as well as how they want to proceed, especially looking towards decarbonization. And again, when we look at CBAM, and the executive director touched on this quite a bit. When we look at the impacts of CBAM, this has serious impacts for South African exporters, particularly because the electricity that we use is so carbon intensive. This is taken into consideration when this is then exported into the international market. And there's a particular vulnerability when we look at various sectors, whether it's cement, fertilizers, aluminium, iron and steel, and the like. So again, important things for us to consider, because it also tells us how we time the transition. I know the term pace and scale of the transition gets thrown about quite a bit. But the pace and scale of the transition also needs to factor into consideration what other geographies are deciding to do, what other measures are being imposed in other geographies, particularly if you are trading with them. And then when we're looking at the impact of the CBAM on jobs in South Africa, I mean, again, there is a lot to take into consideration there in terms of jobs, as well as the numbers. So we can see the steel sector being quite impacted, chemical sector, auto and manufacturing, considering that they're already going through so much already, as well as the coal mining sector as well. Okay, this has gone back too much. I preferred the previous clicker. I did. This has gone back too much. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I just thought for context, we should also go back to some of the studies that the PCC has commissioned, because again, there's always the conversation around pace and the scale of our transition. But most importantly, there's one of the conversations that we never take into consideration is the fact that, you know, South Africa's transition must also take into context what the rest of the world is doing. And to respond to that, then the PCC then conducted this research with it was Cambridge Econometrics that did this work. And really the question was, where do we fare GDP wise, depended on, you know, the climate action that we take as a country vis-a-vis what the rest of the world decides to do. And the results of this study were quite important for us to take into consideration. And I don't think the clicker here is working properly as well, so I'm unable to. It's going back. So I'm unable to point to what I'm talking to, but please do follow. So one of the things we looked at is, you know, so I'm looking at the first sort of column, which is talking about what South Africa is doing and what the rest of the world is doing. Okay. So we looked at what happens if South Africa pursues its net zero sort of targets. And what would that mean if the rest of the world decided to just maintain business as usual and didn't do anything? And from that study, what we could see, it was a really comprehensive modeling exercise. The result of that modeling exercise showed that when we're looking at and this is now the next column that I'm referring to, for gross domestic product for South Africa in 2030, we're looking at a growth of 7.5%. Okay. And then, then we looked at, what if South Africa doesn't pursue any net zero targets or sticking to 1.5? How do we fare versus the rest of the world if the rest of the world pursues its 1.5 targets, climate targets? And what that study then showed was that in terms of GDP in South Africa in 2030, we're looking at a reduction in GDP of about 4.2%. So this then helped us to conclude that it remains in our best interest as a country, from a competitiveness point of view, from a growth, especially gross domestic product point of view, to stick to net zero targets by 2050. And again, for issues related to competitiveness as well as growth, this is in our best interest. So again, and this is basically the previous slide depicted differently, and you could map this across various scenarios. And why I just wanted to highlight this is that yes, our local sort of initiative is important, but it's also important for the rest of the world to do its part. But if you see what the previous slide would have showed, that it's still in the best interest of the South African economy for us to pursue decarbonization. And to do this, whether the rest of the world is sticking to its targets or not. I'm raising this because I know there's a lot of conversation around, oh, well, the United States is saying this, so is it still in our best interest to decarbonize? And my answer would be absolutely still in our best interest to decarbonize. And studies have shown us that this is the case. So there's NBI colleagues in the room, so they would know this work. This was from your Just Transition Pathways work. And basically what this work, as well as, you know, the work that the World Bank did on the microsim models shows, and a number of studies confirm this, by the way, that in the long term, there is a net positive job gains when we look at our transition, right? But we must also factor into the fact that there will be employment shifts when it comes to sectors. And why I thought highlighting this was important is for us to take into consideration the sectors that are going to experience reductions and those who will develop in the long run. So Lwandle was talking about green hydrogen and, you know, the flag that they've gotten from prioritizing green hydrogen investment. But when you look at the studies, there is a space for green hydrogen to play, particularly having an uptake when you look at the year 2045. Whether you look at it for electricity or whether you look at it for the transport sector. So certain shifts will happen, especially when it comes to employment shifts, and it's going to happen across sectors. But if this shift happens in a manner that is haphazard, I mean, you can agree that then the transition doesn't become predictable, it doesn't become smooth, it creates a lot of challenges along the way. we always put up this slide, and I'm glad to see that there's a lot of transport people in the room here today. Because just to indicate, because there's also a perception that our journey to net zero is a straight line, right? It's a nice, cute descent that goes to 2050, and that's actually not the case, right? It is actually, it's about convex, yes. It's actually convex in nature, and this is the work that was done by the World Bank Country Climate and Development Report. And they looked at what it's going to take for South Africa to achieve net zero by 2050. Also remember what I said around, it remains in our best interest to stick to net zero by 2050 from a competitiveness and GDP point of view. What it's going to take, this is the difficulty of that net zero to 2050, because it requires deep decarbonization, hence the convex shape. It requires deep decarbonization, and if you look down there, the biggest contribution is really on the power sector in the dark blue. On the energy industries as well as the transport sectors. Those are like the biggest, the top three sectors that require deep decarbonization. And when I say deep decarbonization, this is not a far off thing. This is really, most of the work needs to be done between the years 2030 and 2040, right? Which with real implications for our nationally determined contributions. Why this is also an important sort of diagram to reflect on, and I make use of this diagram quite a lot. And again, it goes back to the shape of your transition journey to net zero by 2050, is that it gives you sufficient planning time, it gives you sufficient planning horizons, and doing it in this manner ensures that your transition is also affordable. You're able to take advantage of existing cheaper technologies now, as opposed to delaying decarbonization, which once done later, it becomes more expensive. And then it's not so just, because you are not giving people sufficient lead times in order to plan properly and implement. Now, this is not my slide, so I have to say that up front. I don't want to be accused of plagiarizing. But I did ask permission before I used it. So this is the work that was done by the DPRU at UCT. And this was done by Professor Harun Borat as well as Francois Steenkamp. And really what they've done for the coal sector is really zone in on the coal labor market. And to be quite honest, this has been probably the most impressive sort of tabulation of where are we or who are the people that exist in the coal labor market. What was very useful about this is that it was and I've been to a lot of meetings where the coal labor force is spoken about quite a bit, and people will talk about the numbers that exist in the sector. But the important contribution of this work is that we can see who they are in terms of their professional designation. We can also take into consideration their level of employment, and then I haven't included, not level of employment, level of education, apologies. And then I didn't include the slide that makes reference to the age profile, but you could have a look at that. This is the study that was done on the labor market and a just transition for the coal sector. And quite nicely, it gives you details around who is in the sector, right? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? What's their education level? And quite detailed what is their age profile. Why their age profile is so important is because you can structure interventions for a particular worker in the call sector based on how old they are. So if they are, for example, if they're, for example, I don't know what the case is, their job profile is, we'll probably say elementary in nature, and they're at the age 55 to age 60, conversations around early retirement is probably most beneficial to be had with those workers. What this does is it helps you also structure your just transition interventions because you would know if there's a particular technical skill you require. What age is this person in? Are they able to learn additional skills? Are they early on in their career? So they would need, to have some sort of movement, so that they can have jobs elsewhere. Are we able to transition them into something else? I think what's important to now start doing, because the Code of Good Practice speaks to sectors broader than just coal, but it's always good to kind of make reference to the coal sector because a lot of work has gone into the coal sector. But again, what's important about the study is that now we can go into transport and do a similar exercise to understand who are these workers, what is the labor market looking like in the transport sector, what does it looking like in agriculture, and what is it looking like in manufacturing and industry. So just wanted to highlight that. Another important sort of information for us to take into consideration, especially when looking at labor market tools, is around the dependency composition of these coal households. And what you'll see is when you look at the orange and the red, those are the workers who have quite a number of dependents that are reliant on them. So it also gives us an additional view that just transition interventions also need to take into considerations the people that are reliant on a particular worker and they are dependent on that particular worker, so that you can understand that when you're moving things around, it's not just about the worker, but it also has to do with the dependency. So the dependency composition of coal households also being an important issue to reflect on. So another slide that I also thought was really important to reflect on is this one. And this really relates to how much of the current support programs can we rely on to help support workers in the event, we don't have adequate support in place. And I think it was in the government roundtable that this slide was really amazing, to me at least, because what it shows you is the available support programs that government currently provides. And we look at those in terms of their share of the median coal wage. So I don't have to tell you in the room here today, workers that are engaged in the coal sector are pretty well paid if we were to relative to their counterparts in other sectors, right? And again, this is because of the industrial power of the trade unions, and they've been able to negotiate better wages. And I don't want to just say better wages and leave it like that. It's better wages relative to workers in other sectors. So if we didn't structure this transition properly and we left it to, the government support to sort of take over, what you can see is that the old age grant, now I Can't see my own slide. All right. When we look at the old age grant, that's like 6.5% of current median coal wages, right? So that's low. When you look at the child support grant, we're looking at about 1.6 percent share of the median coal wage. Things are slightly improved when we look at the temporary employer-employee relief scheme. So it takes you to about 45.6%. And then the compensation fund is quite low at like 16.3%. What's important to note is that these median wages will differ across different sectors. So the picture for agriculture probably looks vastly different. And the picture for transport or industry probably looks different. But it's important for us to take this into consideration because a number of the interventions when looking at active labor market policies around income support, income replacement, also take into consideration what's available in terms of government support programs. But clearly, there needs to be something in addition to government support programs. And again, when Lisa does her presentation, she'll get into this in a bit more detail. So I'm going to leave my presentation there. Yeah, that's my last slide. I'll leave my presentation there and just see if there are any sort of reflections from colleagues from this presentation. I often leave the awkward silence to kind of like fester, and then someone feels pressure to ask a question. So I'll let it fester a little while longer. Is it okay if I ask? Great. Sorry, is that okay? Yeah, can I just see if there are hands first and then okay, so I see this one and then a hand over there. You can start and then we'll take the next round.
Thank you very much. I was looking at this graph and I'm smiling to myself. You know, when you look at the what is it? The expanded public works program. It's a bit, you know, and the community work program. And I'm looking at the child support grant. Hey, there was another one, grant top up. I say, hey, these people, they even get bonuses. Now, what does it say to unemployed people? You know when you look at this thing and I'm sorry, I'm going to really be straightforward about this. When you I don't know if this is the right when you become pregnant, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, it doesn't involve the government or it doesn't involve taxpayers' money. So when you are now in the government's program, that they have to somehow say this is the amount that is going for child support grant, what are you educating our young adults, the upcoming generation? That no, don't worry. In South Africa, just go and give birth. The government have you in plans. They will plan for your unplanned pregnancy and go again and have another child. They will still have plans for your unplanned pregnancy. What are we teaching? You know, I think South Africa somehow we need to really be mindful when we, you know, respect the money. Then money will respect South Africa. Whenever you're thinking about taxpayers' money, why can't it be used for community works program, get more people employed, say no to crime? You can't say no to crime by just saying it, but by what? Improving the economy and giving people jobs. Mina, that's what I stand for. And this child support grant, according to me, it should be null and void. Then people will learn accountability. Every single time you think of being pregnant, you'll think about, are you going to afford the child? I thank you so much.
Thank you. Um, okay. You know, people on grants do pay tax, right? Yeah. People on grants do pay tax, VAT, value added tax. They may not be paying pay as you earn or income grants, you know, but they are also paying grant. I spoke about in the previous session. I also want you to hear me in the spirit that I'm trying to deliver this message. Um, the Minister of Basic Education, I said this in the other roundtables, because can I just say, in all the roundtables, the issues related to social support and social security have been quite widely contested. I'll say this, it's not coming up for the first time. And in one of the previous roundtables, I did make mention of the reflections made by the Minister of Basic Education when she was announcing the matric results. And what she was saying, and I mean, I understand your issues of responsibility and accountability, but in terms of learner participation in school and their ability to finish schooling and reaching matric, what they're seeing in terms of their studies is that, you know, children who don't get access to the child grant, their ability to finish matric is compromised. Okay. And when we're talking about a human development index, right, we want to train people for this transition. And if we're not supporting them from what do we call it, from cradle to when they matriculate, where are we supposed to find this resource? You can't go to school if you are not fed. You can't go to school if you are not nourished. So these are the things for us to take into consideration. What's happening is that children who are exiting the child grant system before they conclude or they sit for their matriculation exam, it's either they're doing worse or they are completely falling out of the system. And where do you think that kid is going to meet you? When they're taking your cell phone without your permission. So the social ills that we're talking about, they come from somewhere. They don't exist in the sky, right? So this, and it's not to rebut anything. It's just so that when we talk about these issues, they do have a role that they are playing in our society. If we're saying, and maybe to take it back to the labor market now, if we're saying that issues related to social support, income support for our communities, they need to be coupled with active labor market policy, I agree with you 100%. I don't disagree with that point of view. So for example, and I'm glad you touched on the public employment scheme. So for example, if we're saying for you to be able to receive something, be part of a public employment program, we're giving you skills at the same time, we're equipping you with this particular resource, you are building yourself up and you are building your country at the same time, and we're achieving whatever objectives we set out through that particular program. I agree with that sentiment, 100%. But I just feel that views are important. They have to be said, but there's another side of the picture that also needs to be said. Next hand, please.
No, I think you partly said what I wanted to say, but I think the reality is that on that last slide, the medium coal wage is not really a good indicator for us of you know where we need to be putting our focus or what we need to be benchmarking. Obviously, because the coal wage is quite high relative to other sectors, and the number of coal workers we're talking about is relatively low. So I think that just averaging it out and being a bit more realistic around how we conceptualize what is a reasonable target for income generation is more difficult, particularly in those communities that are impacted, because the key thing is going to be how we going to understand what the economic opportunities are going to be outside of what Eskom might be able to provide through the repurposing or repowering of the power stations and depending on what's going to happen with the mining sector and the like. But I think for me, it goes to your point, we have to be looking at these solutions more broadly. We have to be looking at the twinning of any, social protection or income support with a range of other complementary interventions, and we need to be factoring those in and understanding. So if we're talking about income generation, how are we going to be able to unlock the opportunities that are needed for people to be able to generate income? How are we going to identify what kind of support those people need in those communities to be able to generate income outside of wage employment, and what kind of skills or enterprise development support or whatever the measures are, the active labor market measures or associated measures that are going to be needed to equip. So I think it's quite a complex thing, and it needs a kind of a holistic sort of view of if you just take the community as a kind of or those local geographic areas as a kind of an ecosystem, what is it going to take to create a meaningful solution for those communities that are going to be directly implicated in the transition in the kind of Mpumalanga area, for example, which is not to say that Mpumalanga is the only area that's going to be affected. So I think it's just tempering these kind of very wonderful graphs that we see with, taking a bit of a step back and actually looking at it more from an economic perspective rather than a very supply side perspective on, what money we have available to support these communities. It has to almost be ground up rather than top down, and quite nuanced around a more holistic solution.
Thanks for that, and I agree with that. Again, when Lisa gets into her presentation on the actual code, she has some suggestions in terms of some practical interventions, and the outcome of this session would kind of help us in terms of which interventions are necessary. So, I get that with a meeting with business enterprise development would definitely be high up on the agenda. The enterprise development question has been the trickiest and probably the weakest link in our transition discussions. And it's not happening like that on purpose. It's just the complexities that surround the whole conversation. And you're the experts here. You work on this more than I do. So it would be good to kind of hear what's worked, what hasn't, what are the pitfalls that we should look at so that we're not falling into making those sort of similar mistakes. I just need to see if there are further inputs. Okay, I see there's one more. I'm going to let the awkward silence fester. Nothing yet. Okay. Okay, so then Tina will come in afterwards.
No, thank you very much. I want to add a bit of sauce to the lady's comment. I think from a scientific point of view, if you isolate data, it will give you a very wrong picture. If you look at the social grants, personally, from our views, is if you look at a life of a child from pre-birth from birth to all the way to university or even after in South Africa, there's a serious dependency problem. And the government spends money on condoms, the government spends money on contraceptives and free healthcare. I still make the child and I get grants, and the child gets free education, free healthcare, free housing for the mother and father. Then I get unemployment grant. Then we go to university for free. Where do we get stuck? We still have the 34% unemployment rate with those initiatives in place. Where do we get stuck? I say the answer, industrialization. We have one of the biggest programs right now in South Africa, the TDP, where there's good money in transmission development. I play in the TDP space with my colleagues here. We cannot find skills in that area. This is a 440 billion rand program that is currently running as we speak, to unlock the grid because we have too much generated energy that is not being transmitted. If you look at from manufacturing to the contractors to level of skill, there's no people in that space. We even have one supplier of a designated product in South Africa. Now, if the IDC says, let's put 3 of those factories today, we are going to be able to take care of the grid today. That is given. And those are type of employment issues that we're looking at. Yes, from a grant perspective, I think it does help to a certain extent, but we can't have it for more generations to come. It should be a stepping stone to address the social ills that we have and obviously redressing the past. But we need to get to a point where we start paying for things, and that is industrialization. And unfortunately, people don't have access to knowledge. There is a lot of research sitting with CSIR, Council of Geoscience. We know how the country is capable of anything, but there's no real attempt in making sure that we industrialize as much as we can. And what pays me a lot, Lebo, just to add, is that if you look at the TDP, half of that money comes from our own money, fiscus. And that is money of projects that are going to happen in South Africa to resolve a security issue in South Africa. And if you don't have those factories for the components of lattice, the components of those structures, we are going to import something that is going to work in South Africa with South African money. This is a time for us to industrialize. We can put up that factory tomorrow morning, it will make money, and it can employ a lot of people, particularly the Northern Cape and the Western Cape, and also parts of, your Free State and Gauteng. So the gap has to be bridged as quickly as possible. That is why people are against just energy transition, because it looks like we're losing more jobs, and it's not packaged properly to say, what can we do? Maybe for my last sentence is that the reality is that when you travel the whole Africa, our unemployment rate is a total population of Namibia and Botswana and half of Mozambique put together. If you had to remove everyone in those countries and put unemployment people of South Africa would fit in those countries. So it shows you that it's a real problem that we really need to deal with. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for raising and I guess because we've lived with these challenges for as long as we have, we're almost desensitized to them. The level of unemployment, that's like war, like, when a country's going through a war, that's when it's got the levels of unemployment that look like this. And we've had it for as long as we have, it's structural, yes. So we're not taking into consideration just the gravity of the situation that we're finding ourselves in. So thanks for raising the issue related to the transmission development plan. In my naivety, when I read that we need 14,000 kilometers of grid, I immediately got excited because I was like, "Ooh, that's a lot of jobs." Not understanding the complexity that you're raising, that specific skills are required. And from the fact that you're saying that those are not even here, and I mean, we need to expand the grid as in yesterday. So if we don't have those skills, we're getting them from elsewhere, which is not productive for what we're trying to achieve. And you're right. This is the stuff that then creates the animosity around South Africa's just transition, because it then feels like there is a displacement of your job and you are not getting any tangible benefits out of it, which I will agree with you 100%. And you're right, the TDP is a public-private partnership. Half of this money is state money. That will be coming in to expand the grid, which is something we need desperately if we are to bring on board additional renewable energy capacity that we so desperately need if we are to retain our industries here in South Africa. I just want to check out the other hand. Tina, you wanted to say something. Checking. Okay, I'm waiting.
Perfect. I'll just be 2 seconds. I just wanted to give an ILO perspective on your comment. My name's Tina van Straten, representing the ILO alongside Matilda, Alexio, and Sheila. And I just wanted to say that a fundamental belief in the ILO is that poverty anywhere is a danger to prosperity everywhere, right? And social protection, from an ILO perspective, does not prevent the creation of decent work or the promotion of decent jobs. Actually, when you combine social protection clause and active labor market policies, we can create more decent work, but we can also empower specifically impoverished communities to be able to take up those jobs that are created. I mean, in South Africa, I think the last stats were that 1 in 5 children in South Africa suffer from stunted growth, right? And malnutrition. That is not just something that is going to impact young children. That will reproduce itself throughout that child's life cycle as they grow into an adult, where they are unable to meet their full economic potential because of the stunting and the lack of food that they had as children. And so that's why, as the ILO, we believe that social grants protect workers in imperfect labor markets. In South Africa, as in the rest of the world, we have an imperfect labor market that is fundamentally shaped by historic inequalities, right? And so social protection flaws combined with these active labor market policies can create decent work. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a how do we combine them in order to ensure that we protect the children of today without jeopardizing their future, and also do it in a way that it doesn't incentivize dependency. But the ILO also has a lot of research that says that social protection flaws grants do not actually promote dependency. And actually, most of the time, they're empowering, helping people to improve their social mobility and move upwards. So I just wanted to contribute that and say that I heard what you said. And yeah.
Thanks, Tina. I'm gonna move on to you, sir.
Thank you, Peter. So there's just 2 points I'd like to make and open it for discussion in thinking. So number one, we know foreign direct investment is needed in South Africa. But I think the challenge that we're having too, especially in this industry, is South Africans are very skillful and intelligent and innovative. We sit with technology here that needs investment. However, most of the time we're finding people investing in our economy, imposing their technologies as well and their skills. Whereas we need to look at different partnerships where we use the investment to create localization and export markets, which will benefit them into Africa and other areas of the world. Because we're sitting with a lot of advancements in a lot of areas that I've been working in, and I see that, we've just got a delegation coming from one major country as well. But when they looked at what they want to do here and the technology, they themselves as a global company saying, this is advanced. So how do we bridge that gap? And then also talking on our infrastructure development from that perspective, we're all aware of the major upgrade that Eskom is going out on. It's 440 billion. But on the transmission and distribution network, I've been chatting to somebody that's been part of the industrialist program into transformer development as a local entity, and they're not even been seen as a subcontractor. So where does the corporate politics, government, business come together to assist those SMMEs that have the skills, capability, and factories to grow now and be included? So there's a lot of that gray area that's not making things develop, that we need to try to understand. Is there bottlenecks? Why? And how do we address that? Because I think that's the challenge with small businesses now. They're not getting to the next level. They're not included because maybe they're not corporate or politically connected, but yet they've got the skill and they've got the merit. So it's how do we address those issues?
And moving away from seeing localization as red tape or an additional burden to conducting a business. Localization should be embedded because, again, taking away from the point that if these things don't gel well together, interventions then fall through the cracks. I mean, a practical example is when we gave all those tax rebates for people to put solar PV, right? I mean, I've got issues with that rebate, but anyway, that's another story. But how it was structured and there was no coordinated planning around it. What ended up happening is that middle income households bought all of those solar panels. It was imported nicely from China, and we gave all of that tax money to the Chinese. So if this was coupled with local manufacturing capability, not only would we have developed that capability here in the country, but yeah, the money could have stayed within our shores. But again, this is why the need to have this type of conversation, because I'm also hearing the clear need for these to be localized interventions and them to be considered when we are doing the TDP, when we are doing infrastructure upgrades. So I'm taking that as a point. Any more? Sure.
Sorry, just engaging and the topic is getting heated. So yeah, just to add on that, in terms of the skills, yes, I do believe that there's a lot of skills in South Africa, technology-wise. Yes, we are, I mean, I just mentioned our flagship that we are very proud of. You know, so I think the support at this moment, right? And when I was in corporate, I hated sustainability, right? And I sat in a position where I was approached by a lot of companies that are looking for, you know, to do business with us in terms of measurement, monitoring, measurement, and verification of your ESG. And in the 8 years that I was sitting in that platform, one key driver of myself finding myself in business was the fact that all these companies, I did a research of about 20 companies that approached me directly, and they were all outside the country. So most of them from London, and then you had a few from India, and then there's America, but a vast majority were organizations from London. And how we worked with them, they approach us, obviously, with the means that they use. And we work remotely with them. They start collecting our data, you know, using their platforms, and we take it from there. And again, it's money flying outside the country, it's not creating jobs in South Africa. And I kind of like, you know, wasn't happy with that. And I decided that I'm going to learn as much as I could in that space and just, you know, draw from those learnings and then try to bring this whole, you know, business model home. And essentially, I'm just adding, you know, I didn't intend to have a view in this, but after hearing what I heard, I just thought maybe I should just, yeah.
Thanks for that. I mean, all the views are welcome, and we're having this session because we want to hear.
Yeah.
And the more practical experience, the better. You must understand, those of us who sit and do research, we've got no experience in actual industry. So we're having this session because we want to hear what's happening in real time. So thank you for that. Lisa, you want to say something, and then we're going to need to get to the next session.
No, thank you. So I'm Lisa Steftel. Sorry that I'm late, but I was online. And I'm just making another provocation for all of you to think about as you have lunch, which relates to what I'll be talking about after lunch. So Tina from the ILO says, the ILO believes you must have social protection and active labor market policies. Lebo said earlier on today that when they did the PCC Just Transition Framework, it's just that, it's a framework. These are all aspirational views or guideline views. Where we are now, because I think Matilda also said, you know, the just transition is not in the future, it's now. And when something is now, we have to make choices. And the key choice the key philosophical choice, but very real choice that guides this code of good practice is, can we say as a country, important for our country, that workers who have had jobs for 5, 10, 15 years in coal, or workers that have had jobs in the automotive sector, still need a special and additional dispensation for a just transition, as opposed to the child that, the young girl who was raped and wants a child support grant. Because the South African fiscus has only got so much money. And as a country and our political leadership have to make choices. If we believe that there is political value in a special dispensation for just transition workers, then we have to motivate it. And because this is my last part of the provocation, because this is a business meant to be people from the business sector. And Matilda again said earlier on today that there's as many opportunities in the just transition as there's losses. And where do many of those opportunities going to go? They're going to go to big business. So is not the responsibility for helping to fund the just transition of workers that are affected have to come from business? And if that's to happen, how does that happen? And what should a code of good practice say? That's to think about over lunch. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a worthwhile provocation. I think this is why I've enjoyed having these social partner specific engagements, because you're hearing the unique issues to a particular social partner, and our responsibility at the end of the day is to bring them all together. And thanks for the honest reflections, by the way. This is exactly why we opened up this forum, so that we can have these robust, honest reflections and for us to have a conversation. It helps in shaping what we view as support. And how do you design that support? Do we create another layer of support? Or do we give all of this money to business and say, go to create the jobs? And then I heard an amen. That's it's a question. I've not ruled on the matter. It's something that we must have a broader conversation about. Okay, so we do have to move on. Our next speaker is already online. Patricia, are you there?
Hi, good morning. Yeah.
Yes. So Patricia is generous enough. I don't know what the time difference is in Brazil, Patricia, but you've been generous enough to give us some reflections from the Brazilian experience. We've really wanted to hear Global South experiences, because we usually hear about the Germans, the Spanish, and the Canadians, which are great, but we do like hearing from Global South partners. So maybe let me hand over to you, Patricia, just to give your reflections on what the experience in Brazil has been around managing a just transition.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. I'm 5 hours less, so it's early, but not that much. I know it's before lunchtime, but I hope I can inspire you somehow with some of the context in Brazil and Petrobras. So I work for Petrobras, which is a Brazilian company. It's half of state and half of private investors. It's mostly dedicated to fuel productions. So there's no coal or electricity is not expressive. It's more for own consumption. And sometimes, of course, we offer electricity when the hydroelectricity in Brazil is lower than demand. So I will show you a bit of the strategic plan of Petrobras, how it's just transitioning in this top context, because we have our key choices, but we are also inserted in a government context where we have climate policy and also energy and power generation policy, energy transition policy. So I'm a chemical engineer, so I worked for Petrobras for 20 years. I was mostly dedicated to refining optimization, but now I'm more related to decarbonization and project evaluation, energy transition, and just transition. If I could, I will share a presentation that would guide my speech. Let me show you. Do you have it?
If we could put it in presenter view.
Yes.
All right, great.
No, yeah. Great. So you have here, I can share this presentation later with Matilda, and you have links for Petrobras annual reports and a detailed presentation of all the initiatives and also my contacts. But let's go to the Petrobras key choices. Petrobras so is focused on oil and gas. For the next 5 years, most of the investment is for oil and gas production with economic and environmental resiliency. Because we consider the oil price is low because of the type of the production, and we are investing a lot in this decarbonization of operations as well. So this is what environmental resilience means. We also chose to replenish our oil and gas reserves, creating value for society and shareholders, because oil production and exportation represents a lot in Brazil, income, and also generate lots of jobs and also taxes, all the social benefits related. And also because the national demand for the next years in the energy planning still demands for oil and fossil fuel production. And also, we have some expansion of industrial facilities to integrate energy transition, for example, processing biofuels in the refineries that already exist, considering that represents energy efficiency and low cost of to start the energy transition. And then we can have these biofuels being sold together with fossil fuels. And also we have ambitions to achieve operational net zero emissions in 2050 and the leadership in the just energy transition. When we say leadership in just energy transition in the Brazilian context, many people thought it would be, we will produce most of the new renewables energy. But that means to actuate with excellence in the business as it is, and also to invest in research and development, to bring up new technologies to a lower cost, and means leadership in this context of Brazilian energy transition and energy supply. And what is this Brazilian context? We have a strong national policy for climate change because Brazil was leading the COP 30. You saw maybe the Brazilian commitments to the climate change. So reducing GHG emissions, adapting to climate change, because as a global South country, we also suffer a lot from the climate change impacts, as you probably also do. Environmental conservation, we have a challenge with forest conservation, and developing of carbon credit markets is all related to this policy for climate change. By the other side, together linked and with synergy, we have energy policy to guarantee the supply of refinery products and biofuels to electricity to the population, attracting investment for energy production, and also to guarantee fair price and energy of quality. So we see common objective of these policies. That means eradication of poverty by the energy use, and also because all those business produce social benefits as employment. Reducing social inequalities that in Brazil is still high, and also rational use of energy, more equity use, and reducing emissions from energy and transport. In this context, considering the energy for transport, that is the main business from Petrobras, our main challenge is related to production of diesel. What could replace the fuel used for road transport? That most of our transportation is road transport. Brazil is a large country, so it's a lot of fuel consumptions for this, and there's no technology that could replace all this demand in a short time. So I bring here is still the Brazilian context. This is the Brazilian commitment to the Paris Agreement. So this is our emissions in the chart. And we have a commitment to go to net zero emissions for all the GEG emissions in 2050. This is challenging because it includes methane emissions in the GEG. And then we have the meat production that has lots of emissions together with the fuel and deforestation. So this is the challenging commission that we participate. So first point that I would mention that Petrobras is inserted in the planning is participating of the climate policy and to discuss which technologies we could contribute to reduce emissions in align with this climate plan policy. The detailed climate plan policy, we call it climate plan, Plano Clima, it's for the next decade. So for the next decade, we have carbon budget for all the sectors. So if the business could be aligned with this carbon budget, we consider that we are favoring the climate policy, but we don't only, we do not wait for the carbon budget goal to come, but we participated in this process. We showed the strategic plan, our capacity to produce fuels, which type of fuels, what new energy we could offer for this context, and what we are investing in research to develop new technologies that could help this trajectory of reducing emission to happen. And so the context of policies is interesting now in Brazil. We hope it's going to continue because sometimes the political government change and we deaccelerate a little bit the policies for climate. But in this moment, we have strong policies to commit to the Paris Agreement. We are inserted on. So how do we read that? This is my translation because since we started working with Just Transition as a company, as a fuel company, I try to understand what is the environment, what's the context, and how we could translate and interpret that for corporate practice. So this is the main example I would have to share with you because we try to understand where we are inserted, because even if we are a state company, there are some issues and inequalities in the society that we would not act directly to help to solve. So we try through the business to help the best development of Brazil. So we see just transition context in these three parts, like the transition, that's the movement for a low carbon economy, where we have national choice. That means what's the rhythm and the roads we will choose to offer the technologies to produce energy that the country demands, and also align with the carbon budget goals. So this involves lots of studies, integrated mathematical modeling, and we perform this modeling and the studies internally, but we also participate in the government studies, bringing inputs. And still in this first part of the movement, we also see the discussion that is international cooperation, related to the orderly and inclusive reducing the fossil fuel productions. We support Brazil in the discussion of the criteria to participate in this planning and discussions because we produce lots of fossil fuels as well. And this second part, we see how this business or this movement could favor the sustainable development agenda. There are some SDGs that are more related to the oil and production or the energy activities. So I select some of them, and we read all these objectives and their goals, and we connect with our initiatives. For example, when we are investing in research and development, which SDG objective is favored by that initiative. So we try to communicate our initiatives connect to SDG. So that means that we are favoring the SDG agenda, and this is one of the basis of the just transition for us. And the third part, we tried to, in all this process, studies and investment, to address climate justice. That means equity of access to energy and the benefits of the transition, justice for recognition of vulnerable groups requiring differentiated and inclusive solutions. That means not all the business will supply the energy required for some groups of people that are already apart from the consumption. They could not pay for the energy bill, they cannot access the energy physically. So we think it's important to recognize those groups and understand energy poverty, and then having initiatives in the business or in the social environmental projects that could address part of this inequality. And the third type of climate justice, I would mention participation. We participated in the discussions for the governments and policies as well, but here also includes the discussions and dialogues with all the stakeholders. I would mention this is our challenge for now. This is something that we really want to improve. I used to say that talking about just energy transition, we talk openly that we are not completely ready to talk about that because we are still building our trajectory and we're still learning how to do this in the best way, intentionally. So I think dialogue and effective dialogue, we still need to improve that, even if we have lots of human rights initiatives and social responsibility policies internal in the Petrobras. But I think it's important to learn how to translate what we are listening from the parts to what we need to choose for the next years, for the coming years, for the future. And then translating that to the Petrobras strategic plan, I put intentionally in 3 blocks because I think they connect to what I showed in the context. So we also have the movement to offer the energy that the country is demanding, and also with emissions reductions. So in the energy supply, Petrobras has the ambition to continue to offer 31% of the energy in the energy matrix in Brazil for the next coming years until 2050. That means if the society is reducing the demand for fossil fuels, we need to add new energies to supply this demand. And also we have the operation decarbonization, renewable energy production, as I mentioned. And we, at this moment, have a lot of energy efficiency program because this is the reduced cost of the lower cost of reducing emission first. And we are integrating some new business to the existing business, as I mentioned, biofuels processing, and we try to make this align with the National Energy Plan. Together with this first part of the movement of offering energy, we have lots of project evaluations. So the new energy production is not expressive, but the studies are a lot. Even in business opportunities, we have the chance to have partnership, to build new units, but also in research and development. Because for justice, we mentioned a lot of cost of energy. We intend to choose the best technologies, choose the best road, and to develop technology will contribute to reduce cost of energy in a country that we already see lots of low energy consumption because of the price. So the second block that connect directly to the SDG, Petrobras has some ESG drivers that guides our initiative. So each of these drivers, for example, carbon intensity reduction has some, it's connected to the SDG objectives. emissions. So making that communicate better and also help us to measure, because for us, measure having metrics for just energy transition help us to see in the coming years that we are evaluating, and help us to evidentiate that when we communicate, when we report, and also help us to identify if we have gaps or not to address. And to translate the climate justice, we have been working in dialogues, inclusion, and collaboration with communities. For example, considering protection of human rights, social development, restoration, preservation of vegetation. There's some projects related to forests, reduction of energy poverty, clean cooking, and climate resilience. To the employees, I have been watching the discussion before. You have been mentioning about the employees. There's a lot of programs for training the current employees, the ones that are already related to energy transition, to be prepared for the coming future, but also for decarbonization, efficiency for the whole company. So getting the current employees prepared for the new context. As we don't see the business reduction in the coming years, we don't see there's unemployment related to the just transition in the coming years. But there's something interesting for the new business. We have programs to prepare the new employees in the regions that we intend to operate, because new business are in new regions with new technologies. So we consider that preparing regional people to work in this business will be better than having people moving from the country to go to these new locations. So there's a very interesting program for this skilling. And also to dialogue with supplier and clients to understand the demand that is coming and to prepare new products for this demand, and also to have our suppliers, especially local suppliers, developing and getting prepared in developed technologies to supply for the new business as well. So this is a short summary of how I see just transition in our business, how we translate those initiatives. But I have for this Orange Stars some examples. If we have time, I can go deeper and show a bit more from them. And I also want to highlight once more that dialogue is the topic that we are emphasizing this year to prepare, to learn, and to bring it to the discussions to learn how to make it effective. I would ask you how is the time for the presentation, if we could go deeper in some of the topics.
So we've got 5 more minutes left for your presentation, Patricia.
So I show path here and some examples that illustrate what I've mentioned before. For example, having the carbon intensity reduction drivers connect to the SDG has been helping us a lot to communicate, to prepare, and to make metrics and indicators to have a just transition strategy and a trajectory that we could evidentiate. And decarbonizing operations for us is mandatory for us to sustain the current business in this context of low emissions. So there's a journey already that we reduced 40% of the emissions in the last years. So there's a huge program for decarbonization. There's a special fund for it, and there are a program that touch all the activities. So there are goals for each of the business, oil production, refining. Each one would have the own carbon intensity goal for the coming years, and then also the total emissions goal for Petrobras. And related to the new energy, right now the commitment to just energy transition is investing a more focus in bioproducts over the 5-year period. So the strategic plan of Petrobras is 5-year plans. It is updated every year to read the external context and to read the investments that are still interesting. And it's interesting because it's a 5 years strategic plan. We have the climate policy in Brazil for the next detailed for the next decade, but we also are looking for some ambitions in 2050. So right now we are more focused in ethanol, biodiesel, and biomethane in the coming years, because this is more related to the fuel for transport, and this connects these technologies connects better to the what Petrobras has already been doing in the historically. What I like to mention for this new project's evaluation, we inserted in the first phase of the project evaluation the regional characterization. So here you see in the map, this is the average SDG in Brazil. There's no green, almost no green, only in some cities in Southwest where São Paulo state is. So we have a challenge for Brazil related to the SDGs. So we try to consider that in the project's evaluation, bringing the sensibility of the project's evaluating group to the social questions that could be favored by the projects in the beginning, since the beginning. So usually the projects are more evaluated by economics, if they are profitable, but we are also bringing those questions to the evaluation. So we bring the SDG of the city, we see how the government is acting locally, because we believe, as IPECA showed us, that oil and gas industry has the capacity to influence all the SDGs. So we also want to arrive in a good way in these new regions, like not bringing new impacts to human rights or to the poverty situations. Another thing that's interesting for evaluating projects and roads is what I mentioned. I'm working a lot with integrated modeling, because we want to connect emissions and energy supply. So using models that could translate that, because if you are using more biofuel in the projects, it would impact the emissions in agriculture. That would also have a goal in the government policy. So working that with lots of studies is helping us to see for this moment which technologies would be more favored, more cost-effective in the energy transition, more cost-effective in the decarbonization. And also it's important to detail a bit of the research and development and innovation. Petrobras has a research center with many projects in partnership with Brazilian universities, tending to expand more for the north of Brazil, where Petrobras is tending to expand its activities. So there's already many universities involved, and with many researchers that are not direct employees of Petrobras, but we consider that investing in technology, besides of bringing down the cost of new technologies, which favors the energy transition, also brings lots of quality jobs in researching the future jobs that would also improve the social conditions in the regions that we are actuating. To detail the workforce preparation, I mentioned the program that it's called Autonomy and the Autonomia y Renda project. Autonomy, I forgot the English word, sorry about it. But it's a program for preparation of the new employees that could work for Petrobras or other industries, together with technology centers and institutes related to education. And it is intentionally favoring more vulnerable people, like Black people, women, people in situation of poverty. So they have the incentives to study It includes, for example, incentives to help the mothers to leave their children with somebody to be available for study. So this is the program that is preparing the workforce for the new projects or to be related to the new technologies. And this figure here in that you cannot read, but I just want to illustrate how is the Petrobras Academy to prepare the current workforce for the new future. So it's an academy dedicated to the energy transition and decarbonization. And each of this ball is one of the knowledge that we consider that the workers should be prepared in considering the new future of Brazil and also the new context for Petrobras. And then to wrap up, I would mention that we have a strong human rights policy in Petrobras. There are many commitments. We discuss just energy transition in the context of human rights policy. So all the actions that we have to improve the pattern to the just transition is inserted in the human rights governance. And also inside of the social responsibility area that coordinates the Human Rights Commission with the participation of the whole company. We have other initiatives more related to the social environmental projects, some projects related to development of society, and some projects related to the forest that we also see connect to the just transition. And then we consider that all this movement could share some results with society, of course, ensuring access to energy, which is critical for promoting the well-being of Brazilian society. And also because of the investment can generate many jobs additional to the current jobs that are already offered. We consider that could sustain more than 300,000 direct and indirect jobs. And also because the business is part of the economy of Brazil. So when we discuss energy transition, we are also discussing economy transition. Probably this is one of the main points you have discussed today. I see the South Africa context. And also because the investment represents a lot of the investment in Brazil. And it's relevant for the economy. So this is what I brought, but I am also open to see if you have some questions or if you want to talk about one specific topic.
Thanks, Patricia. And thanks for sharing your reflections from Petrobras. I think those were very important for us to reflect on. We're not going to do comments or questions. I'm very grateful for the fact that you did share your contact details if anybody wants to reach out to you more directly. And we could definitely facilitate more conversations. This has been useful to show colleagues in the room that, you know, countries are looking at the transition as an opportunity for economic development. And again, this remains country specific for whatever context you find yourself in. And it looks like Brazil is moving in a way that is beneficial to the people of Brazil. So also prioritizing issues related to human rights, I think, has been really important to reflect on. The fact that you are also, like us here in South Africa, pushing for those climate targets, net zero by 2050, and doing this together with your workforce, with communities, and also ensuring that there's business development at the end of the day. So allow me to thank you for getting up so early to have a conversation with us. And like I said, if there are colleagues in the room who'd like to hear a lot more from your lessons and your experiences, we will facilitate that engagement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will put in the chat my contacts and also some links for Petrobras reports if you are interested in, but I'm open to share also the anything that you want to discuss more deeply.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank
Patricia. We really
you.
appreciate
Have a
this.
good event.
All right, colleagues, we are going to move on. I wanted to give you guys a lunch break, but lunch is not here. So we're going to go ahead and get into the next presentation. And it's not because the caterer doesn't like you. They've been doing this to us the whole time. So I should have actually rewritten the agenda to kind of, see what happens when you don't prepare properly. So Lisa, do you want to come in front or are you okay with where you are? Being mindful of the fact that there's a pillar here and people can't see you. So while Lisa is getting to her seat, so now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of the code of good practice. And then you'll see what we mean with regards to this. And all the presentations that we've had today are a nice build up into what she will be presenting. We really want to hear your views. Labor has had their say, communities had their say, so it's quite important for us to hear from yourselves today. So Lisa, over to you.
Thanks a lot. And because I'm standing between you and lunch, and I can see through here when the lunch comes, I won't be that long, I hope. And also that, but the presentation that I'm going to do will also be circulated. Now, I heard earlier on that there's problems with the clicker, and the sooner I get over the slide, the better, because it's the wrong slide. That's really what I'm going to be talking about. And then problem statement. I think you've heard the problem statement. And this code of good practice will not solve the problem of the just transition. It provides a tool for business, for labor, for communities and government on how to assist in the process and what to discuss. I think I also heard Lebo earlier on saying why a code of good practice was considered by the ILO and the PCC. And it's very much a labor market instrument. It can bind the parties. Those of you who come from, that area know that it can bind particularly the fact that you must consult, but it can't bind you to the outcome of a consult. It can't insist that you reach a particular conclusion with a consultation or negotiation. The other thing about a code is that it can't go beyond legislation. It can't guide government, but really business and labor. And it is restricted to issues of employment law. And it can't also give guidance, for example, to civil society. As a result of that, and I'm looking at Siamo and Sedu here, at least we are suggesting two documents. One is a code where it is possible to bind and provide practical guidance to employers and workers, to provide the certainty that I think was talked about this morning, and a guidance document, which is best practice. So now listen to this Petrobras lady, manager, I presume, and they are in the best practice. Why are they in the best practice? Because they've made lots and lots and lots of money from dirty fuel. And because there's options to move to, what do they say, biogas and those kinds of things. And they're doing the best practice. But there are companies in South Africa that can also do the best practice. So this is best practice, but yes, for business, but also for government, because we know there are parts of our government that believe in doing best practice. And best practice brings stability. It brings greater accept human rights and so on and so on. Meets the ILO. So that is what we are suggesting. 2 different documents, but both will be negotiated or engaged upon at NEDLAC from the PCC. So this slide just sets out some of the terms that we think we'll use in the code. And I also won't go through them in a lot of detail. But just to say that I think, as Lebo said earlier on, we want the code to talk about the how, to ensure procedural justice, and the what, which is distributive justice. So what should the code say about procedural justice? And this is what I presume after lunch, there'll be comments. I think we are all familiar with the importance of social dialogue. Social dialogue is really enables procedural justice through either negotiation, consultation, information sharing, building understanding, and so on. And procedural justice in the labor market is both collective bargaining and consultation, especially on retrenchments. And as I said earlier on, we want to provide advice about the minimum, which is the statutory, how you do that for the just transition, as well as the best practice, which is we call additional. And the forums that can happen through is at a workplace level, is a workplace forum, plant-based, and so on. I'll show you more on the next slide. Okay, let me just go here. So this is what we're thinking, is that the Code of Good Practice should provide guidelines for sector collective bargaining, which is bargaining councils, as well as like in the motor industry, there's a non-statutory forum, workplace collective bargaining at a company or plant level, workplace consultation for retrenchments, which is statutory, and then the LRA also provides for the workplace forums, and the Mining Petroleum Resource Development Act also provides for another forum called a future forum, but only for consultation in those forums. Then the guidance note will provide guidance on, for example, a master plan. I was listening earlier on about transmission. The lady over there was talking about a transmission plan. It might be that you have a consultative forum with like the affected communities where you're going to come with those big lines. There's no law, that says you have to consult about there actually is a law about transmission lines, but it's only worried about the environment. It's not worried about the people so much. And so there can be a guidance about what should happen so that affected communities are not left behind and that the transition can be just. So that's what we want to do in the guidance note. What will be discussed there? Firstly, how social dialogue will happen, the importance of inclusiveness, level playing field, mandating, facilitation, and so on. What can be bargained in terms of the LRA? What else can be bargained as good practice? One thing that they've done, I can't remember, was it Germany or Australia, is that there's a requirement that if your mine is going to close down in 5 years, you start now to consult. Canada. So it can advise about those things. Then Lebo showed a slide from Harun Borat's presentation, which showed that there are different categories of workers. There are older workers and there are younger workers. And you can't have a one-size-fits-all. So there'll be some guidance about how you could look at different packages, and then also about different forums. And the big thing about the guidance note, especially in mining, is that you'll find, and also with Eskom, is that who has built the waterworks, who has built the sewer works in a mining community? It's the mine. Now the mine closes down. Does the sewer works close down? Or can there be a proper way in which it is taken over by the municipality, or what's this thing that workers like, social ownership, or privatized, or whatever? So that's what it won't say you must privatize, but it will say these are the kinds of things that you need to think about government support. So that gentleman at the back there was saying we must be holistic and we must be nuanced. Now it can sound contradictory, but it's not, because what he's saying is you've got to be holistic, you've got to look at everything, and you've got to be nuanced, you've got to pay attention to the specific situation that might face a specific community. Okay, that's the procedural justice. On the distributive justice, again, there's some things that you can negotiate, there's some things that you can consult, there's some things which government must do before you can consult and negotiate, or you can consult and negotiate about, but it requires government, and some is a tripartite forum. So then I'm going to talk more about all these things on the left-hand side, but the column on the right just shows you what you can do. So, you know, the best practice, it's in the ILO guidelines, it says government must support, well, not government support, it says there must be job matching and placement. If someone's going to lose their job, you must help them to find another job. And the just transition, the organized labor will say it must be an equivalent job. You know? Business will say you can be happy with any kind of job, so long as it's a job. So there is a job to be done in matching and placement. The A is at a workplace level, especially at a company level. So within Cecil, you know, we heard the Petrobras example. Within Sariti, it could happen. It can also happen, B is at a sector level. So for example, the motor industry, you know, hasn't got a bargaining council. CIFSA has got a bargaining council, can set up a sector-wide matching and placing institution. At a national level, there is a national pathway, something, Carmel has done a lot of work on that. It could be used, but remember, the people that go to that database, they're all the young people and other people that are unemployed and so on. So I'm not sure how successful it is. And you could also negotiate it at a local level, maybe. The municipality, together with the local labor center, could have something like that. We're not going to prescribe, we'll provide guidelines and so on. I won't go through all the other ones. So I've talked about job placement. That's one way to enable distributive justice that can be negotiated and consulted about. The next one, no, I can see the problem. The Bluetooth or something is not working now. I was doing so well. There we go. Skills development. This is obviously critical. But just as I indicated earlier on, there are choices. Should a young, and there's a lot of work being done on it, you know. One of the big choices of government is that SETAs and the National Skills Fund were set up to be able to enable an orderly system of skills development. But SETAs are, I think I wrote it there, pro-cyclical. So when a business is growing, then there is more money for skills. When a business is declining, there's less money for skills. So there's less money to fund transition. So the JET PMU and NBI and the DHRT are putting in additional initiatives. But I think we want to have a balance, but we will guide about how you use the SETAs in a new context, as well as what else you need to do to ensure that there are skills transfer. You see now it's going very fast. Okay. The one issue of skills, which needs a government, could be done by the private sector, but I think needs a government mechanism, is a tuition allowance. I think that it could be negotiated in a big company that if you going to retrench, in addition to your severance pay and your retrenchment allowance, those workers that have the capacity to become reskilled, you provide a tuition allowance, which can be negotiated. Alternatively, there should be an envelope in the UIF dispensation that also provides for a skills allowance, but only if you've got a placement in a proper accredited college, not that you're going to faff around sitting by Nelly or something like that. Some of these things like this, we in the code, we can't really talk about. As I say, it's just guidance. So income support is obviously the most important. The first, already government provides severance pay, 1 week for every year of service. When I was still in NEDLAC and we were negotiating the labor law amendments, there is a proposal on the table for 2 weeks for every year of service. I don't know if it's going to go through, especially at GNU and so on and so on. There was another proposal which I thought was really interesting. Was that 1 year is paid by the employer, the other year is paid by the state. Okay, the other week, well, the equivalent of the other week, 2 years for every year of service, is paid by the UI. Now, here again, you get into the issue of choices. Should the UI be used for young unemployment through the labor activation programs, or should the UI be used more for workers that already have getting 1 week for 1 year of service? I think where employers have a big role to play, but again, it's an employer and worker thing, is in retirement benefits. Remember, provident funds are bipartite institutions. Can you do more with retirement? Can you have different provisions for early retirement? Harun, when he was here, was saying, why can't you start early retirement at 40? So I thought it was a bit much, But anyway, it's possible. But definitely, I think you could look at 55, 57, et cetera, et cetera. I've talked about the UI. Then there are these TERS, COVID TERS, CCMA TERS, and so on. There's a lot of discussion that we should look at a just transition TERS. And in my mind, there's the money in the UI. It's the choices that how is that money used for? But again, this is outside of our scope. We will, as the consultants, raise the issues, but a code can't deal with this. It's got to be a government instrument. Public employment schemes, again, this is about choices. It can be that now a local forum, the Steve Tretty local municipality, together with Eskom, together with NUM, together with NUMSA, they can all, and the local government, they can sit down and say, for all the children, the siblings, not siblings, what do you call it? The children of workers, they will have first prize to have a public employment scheme. But what about those children whose parents were not working? Why should you prioritize them? And besides, the children of the coal workers, they want coal jobs. They want good jobs. They don't want to be cleaning the streets and digging holes. But there are options. And some people will take them because they don't have other options. And remember also, we're not only looking at coal, we're looking at agriculture. And in agriculture, that can be much more powerful because you're in a rural area and you can no longer grow this because it's too dry, but maybe you can do something else. And there, it's very difficult to distinguish between the agricultural worker who was employed and the other one that wasn't employed, because so many of them are contract workers and so many of them are migrants. So you can say everybody in this community, because now this community is going down, we need a public employment scheme, which is going to build channels because now we need irrigation, while before we relied on the rain or whatever. So it is a vehicle that could be used, can't be in the code of good practice for the LRA, but it can be practical guidance. Okay, the next area, and I think you see now, okay, social protection. We talked about it earlier on. And Tina was very powerfully saying, you need both. And definitely, again, the agricultural sector, for adaptation, for when there's a climate disaster. So non-targeted social protection, I think, is much stronger than trying to say you were affected by the flood, but actually you weren't because you were a little bit higher up, or your house was destroyed, but because even if your house wasn't destroyed, your school was destroyed, and now you must transport your child further. So I think there's thinking to happen there. And then, oh dear, okay. The food is there, by the way. So I've got 2 more slides. Okay. I heard a lot of discussion about this earlier on. And I think the only point I want to make here, the guidance that we'll do, because there's lots and lots of measures, is, I can't remember who made it. Maybe the IDC person made it. Is that to be able to work out, yes, when it comes to economic development, economic diversification, and so on, it can't be a government-only decision. It can't be a business-only decision. It needs to be a decision which involves all affected people in an area like a local government. And you need to do significant investigation, data gathering, research, consultation, and negotiation, particularly when you want to bring in additional government money. Because if this area was just easy to be a growth point, it would be growing. You won't need anything. You don't need a just transition. But if there's an area like Steve Tshwete municipality or like Newcastle after AMSA, it needs a government intervention. That's government money. You've got to be able to make sure you use it wisely. How do you use it wisely? You've got to do research. You've got to build inclusivity. And you can't allow some Chinese or Zimbabwean or whatever person just to jump in with their latest nice idea and think that that's going to solve all the problems. Okay. This one is a big issue for the new sectors, for renewable coal, renewable solar, and so on. That coal miners, they have been organizing even before black miners were allowed to organize. White miners were organizing since 1922. They've got lots and lots of rights. They've got pension funds. They organize. They can strike and so on. Now, when you are setting up a wind farm, you have got a tracker that brings the turbines. You've got an electrician or contractor, doesn't come from the area that is going to help pick it up. Some of them are contract workers. Some of them like to be contract workers. Sometimes you can't use local labor. There are a lot of issues. Again, what we'll try to do is provide some guidelines to ensure that as much as possible, decent work is enabled. It's quite good that in the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, SAREM, there is already that kind of commitment. Okay, the last slide. Let's see. Okay, second last slide. Also in the PCC document, there is this thing called restorative justice, but it's still an intervention. And it's about restoring the land, rehabilitating the land, but it can also be healing. So again, rehabilitation, already it's regulated. So we don't want to replace what's regulated like by NEMA, but there are also job opportunities that can be negotiated. And then, I don't know, it's something that we'll hear from the social partners. Is it important for a local community to have a memorial site or to have a museum that remembers the coal history of an area, or the fact that there was a power plant in Hendrina or Grootfontein or something like that? We can provide some guidelines on that. Okay. The last slide, which I suggest we come back to after lunch, and maybe I can just recap, is what are the issues that we'd like feedback on? Firstly, the 2 instruments, the code and the guidance document. Secondly, the processes. And thirdly, the interventions. Thanks, Lebo.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. I'm worried that if we do go for a lunch break, I'm not gonna get much of you to come back. That's my dilemma. But I also do want to give you a chance to maybe apply your mind to what we've been talking about. I mean, it's important that we get your views. We've already gotten the views of the other social partners in terms of whether they think this is a good idea or not. But most importantly, how do they think this can practically work given your real life experience? I'm not going to hold you guys from having lunch. Can I then request that if we take lunch, it be a very quick lunch, so that we can come back, get your inputs, and then we can outline quickly the way forward. If we can be back here by 2:15 to get your inputs, and then we take it from there. I hope, please do come back because my serious KPI here is to get inputs from the business constituency. So yeah, let's take lunch and then we'll be back after 2:15. Lisa is here, so if you have questions or if something wasn't clear in the presentation, please do ask, but we will do a recap when we come back after the lunch break. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, I think we can reconvene and get back to our discussion. Can we have the last slide of Lisa's presentation? What's happened to our... Okay, it's still okay there. All right, Lisa, do you want to do a quick recap and then we get into this last slide for discussion and then we can get inputs? Yes, please. Remember the pillar, we can't see you. Just to do just a brief recap and then sort of introduce what we're expecting in terms of this last slide for discussion, and then we take it from there. And thanks for coming back. You guys are such a good crowd. This usually doesn't happen. After lunch, people leave. And then I feel used. All right, side note.
Okay, thanks, Lebo. So what I presented were issues for discussion and feedback. And there are three areas. The first is when the ILO and Page started on this journey, the ILO, Page and PCC started on this journey, what was foremost, I think, was the idea of a code that could be binding. What has been established through the work that myself and Paul did is that, yes, a code can be binding on particularly retrenchments, access to information, provision of information and so on, where there's organized workers and organized business. However, as you've all heard, the just transition and making the transition just is often more important, not beyond organized business and organized labor, in collective bargaining. And that's why we're suggesting a guidance document for a broader grouping of stakeholders. And also because if you look at some of the areas where they have organized business and organized labor are going to have to work with not in ordinary collective bargaining environments, but also with local government and communities and so on. And there's not a lot of formalized guidance about that. So that's also what we want to do. So the first input would be, is it useful to have two instruments? I mean, you can also say it's useful to have no instruments, or it's useful to have only the guidance document and forget the best practice, because I've heard from employers that the labor market is too regulated. We don't want any more. We don't like a code. So you might want to say to us, we're just going to be fighting about the code. Let's just rather stick with the practical guidance. So I think, particularly from business, that would be a useful thing. Secondly, I set out the kind of things we should say about process, what you must consult about, the importance of timeline, sequencing, categorizing workers, and so on. Would that be useful? And then, again, there's interventions there. There's 8, I think. The job, and these are from the international experience. They're from experience of other transitions, skills development, income support, social protection, enterprise support, maintaining decent work, and restoration. Is that all? Is that too much? And then another issue which I didn't focus on, but it did come up in this morning, is the scope. Should we only talk about energy mitigation? I think no. Should we include adaptation, agriculture, tourism, flood relief? I say yes. Should we include AI, digitalization, which is initiated at a firm level or company level? I say no. So you restrict it to the climate environment where, because of forces outside of our control, there needs to be a policy intervention where we have to, as those affected, do something for future generations. There's something, it's a bit different from within, like when a business goes down because of climate change, it's not because they haven't done well, that it's because of something out of their control. It's a difficult distinction because AI is also a little bit outside your control, but that might also be something to discuss. Thanks, Lebo.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for that recap and for helping us structure our discussion. So this is the part where we really need your guidance, inputs, frank inputs as well. This is necessary, especially now that we're also looking at taking this work to the next phase. So I just want to see around the room if there are any inputs, any.
Yes, there's always an input.
Oh, sure.
Thank
We'll
you.
start there.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, about AI. I heard you saying no with AI. AI does all the work. You tell AI, create this project for AI does everything. But then we shouldn't be relaxed because it's creating a lazy country where everything you can just put it to AI, meaning that AI would one day do all the job of a receptionist, all the job, and but then we still have people. But then what are we doing with these people who need to be fed, who need to still maintain their lifestyle? Whilst we have AI, who's running your company? AI will be running your company. Maybe AI would now be speaking to customers as they come in, because AI can do anything. So, you saying, no, we just don't have to look at AI. It's something that, actually, how do we beat AI? You beat AI by being, for example, okay, with me, I give it my, like I tell it my story. AI cannot tell about your personal interest or your culture or anything. That's how I beat AI. You know, every time AI says something and I'll be putting in my, my culture. AI doesn't know about my culture. I'll be telling AI about my past experience. So what are we doing to this generation that is not skilled, first of all? And now AI is becoming more powerful. AI would rule the world. And still we have people who needs to be fed, who have not. So AI cannot be ignored in any way. I thank you.
Thank you. So maybe just for context, so how we were thinking about this is, do we confine ourselves to a transition that is informed by, the climate crisis, and that's what Lisa was saying in terms of how we were trying to scope it. I mean, there's nothing that says, especially if you've done this work so well, it can be applied for other sort of transitions. So it could be applied for the transition that's going to take place in terms of AI. It can be applied to various other transitions. The issue here is an issue of scope. When we make it over, when we open it up too much, it then becomes really difficult to
manage.
It becomes really difficult to implement. So we could end up with this really big thing that's just so difficult to interpret and implement because it's stuck in so many considerations. Or we could just focus our attention to doing this really well so that, it's applicable to other concepts. I agree with you 100%. There is a change that is coming and it's induced by artificial intelligence. Our sense was, also let's not try and resolve everything through regulation in our first attempt, right? Let's see what we can do. But I hear your point of view, and like we've said, if there is a shared view in the room, we can consider it, but we must also understand that when we blow it up a bit too much, it becomes really difficult to make use of, because at the heart of it is we must put in minimum standards. It must be easy to apply and it must be practical, especially for those that will be interpreting it either at the workplace level or through the practical guidance in the various sectors. But again, it's not me that's informing the code. It's you who are here today who need to give us reflections in terms of practically what works for you. I just want to, can I take your hand and then your hand, and then I'm going to come to you as well. Okay, we'll take another round after you've spoken.
Thanks. So I'm going to say this without trying to be overly dramatic. I think that this just transition is going to teach us about a whole lot of things that we haven't been dealing with for the past 3 decades, because it's got multiple layers to it. Right. The one thing is for me is that it's going to force us to try and do things differently in a whole range of ways, whether it's in terms of skills development, enterprise development, community development, social protection, all of these things, because one, we are very resource constrained. 2, because these things are imminent. Not even imminent, we're in it, right? So we have to react and we have to be quite agile, and we're not used to being like that in this country. And it's going to take effort from both the private sector and government and civil society and labor and everyone working together in some nice, friendly way to solve these problems. And what it's also going to do is it's going to go to the heart of some of the structural barriers in our economy that are preventing people from generating some kind of sustainable income. Right? Because if it's going to be just, like, we're going to have solutions that really that are breakthrough in terms of that. And so it's tackling a number of different things. But so it has to be an opportunity, or we're going to miss it, and then we're not going to get it again. We have to try and do things differently. I think, so I'm sorry, that was my dramatic part of it. But I think that the issue for me is that because it operates at multiple layers, we don't want to restrict it to what's happening in the workplace. Because a lot of these opportunities, a lot of this, what's going to happen in this process is going to be driven by township economy, rural economy, or village economy. The opportunities are going to be multifaceted, and a lot of it's just going to be about how we're going to get communities to engage in economic activity that they necessarily haven't been, and some of that will be formalized, and some of it will be in formal workplaces, but a lot of it's not going to be. And the reskilling and upskilling is not necessarily, because the formal sector is not creating jobs and not absorbing labor, it's not going to necessarily tied to formal economic activity or the formal sector per se necessarily. So I think we have to look at these things, and I do think this balance between nuance and holistic approaches is important, because whenever we're going into a community or a region or locality or whatever, we're going to have to look at that context very carefully and understand what it's going to take to diversify the economic opportunities, identify the human capital and capacity and aspirations and whatever in those communities, and what people really want to do with their lives, because they are human beings. They're not AI bots, or they're not people that you can just say, you go from here to here, and that's your choice. So I think it is going to be that. I think that in that regard, I think having a guidance document that's going to help us to shape what those local economic interventions are going to look like. What should we be looking for in terms of economic opportunities? And these are not sectoral sort of things, because you can't solve these things sectorally. You can't solve these things from a top-down perspective, which is what we've been trying to do, and we're not winning, because we don't reach. We make very broad things around how many of these jobs and how many of all these skills or how many of those skills or whatever. And when you get down on the ground, it's got no relation to what's actually happening in those communities. So we're going to have to build from the ground up, and it's going to be very different in different localities. In Mpumalanga, it's going to be around adaptation, mitigation, whatever it is. Western Cape and other parts will be very different, because there's opportunities already, and you've got resources and that sort of thing. So I just think that we need to have something that's quite that gives us the ability to look at different contexts and work with those contexts, understand those contexts, analyze those contexts, and shape the kinds of interventions that are going to make sense. And yes, we want to put a primacy on Mpumalanga for sure, but we know that the Eastern Cape is in turmoil. The automotive industry, as we spoke about earlier, if we don't, there's a range of different challenges that we need to solve. And then the TDP, I mean, the thing that amazes me around both the IPPs and the TDPs, these new acronyms that we love, is that you say we can't find skills, right? And I agree. But the issue is, what are we doing? We talk about anticipation and needing to prepare our population for opportunities. Here, there's massive construction opportunities happening both on the IPP side and the TDP side. And there's been no forethought whatsoever about how we prepare communities, how we prepare contractors, how we prepare young people for those opportunities in these areas where these projects are going to come on. And we know a lot about a lot of the projects. I mean, Eskom tells us a lot about a lot of these projects, but we don't sit with the companies and contractors and whatever and work out what we're going to do. So then we're amazed that we can't find skills, and then we bemoan the fact that we can't find skills. So a lot of this has to be shaped by all of these. Where's the demand going to come from? Where's the economic opportunities going to come from in those areas? And then how do we respond to those in a way that's going to be inclusive and make sense for those communities?
All right. At some point, we have to talk about how to unlock this inertia, right? So, I mean, I hear the point. Top down is Yeah, it's not yielding the impact that we want to see on the ground. However, ESCOM makes an announcement, or the IPP or the IRP gives a signal around something in terms of build capacity that we require, but there remains inertia. Nothing happens. We're waiting for a day before to realize, oh my word, we need to do this and we need so many skilled people and we haven't done anything. So it's my provocation on top of yours around how do we then resolve that? Because the reason why we're here is precisely because of that inertia. Please.
Thank you. So there's one or two points I'd just like to raise as well when we're looking at policy. And I think we need to start looking away from capitalism because that's what's happening. Big business is continuously to take everything. And we need to change it into investment. And the reason why I say that is if we just take a look at what we call is our NERSA energy trading licenses, which are now being issued, there's no small black businesses who are given the opportunity to put themselves together and apply for those licenses. There's about 9 in the country independently, and they're all run by big business in some form. So that gap in opportunity is kind of like closed for small business. Then on another note I'd like to look at is specifically around productivity enhancement incentives. So when we look at AI, 4IR, robotics, and mechanization, they do work without losing jobs. So we need to look at how do we make it work. Just as an example, within the farming sector that I had an opportunity to explore, somebody mechanized the farm. The export was 20%, the local consumption 80. When they mechanized the farm, they increased the productivity to export 80. But what they then also did is that 80 that was local actually became the 20, but it was more than the 80. And they also added another 30% jobs within their business. So these things do work. It's how do we integrate it correctly? And I think we missed the integration on bringing it all together. And that's where the gaps lie when we're doing those type of analysis and looking how do we bring it together. So those are my inputs into that. Thank you.
If I could, and then we'll take another round.
So you mentioned scope and map out, sort of to get direction. But I know when sustainability or transition landed in my lap back then, it was all over the place. It can be overwhelming, the adaptation. It is just a lot to deal with. I think prioritization, just look at our priorities right now. What do we want to start with? And just a building block, will be very helpful. Because if we look at everything, we look at skills development, we look at the environment, we look at social aspect, and maybe take it from the ESG framework, is the environment, a burning issue for us. What is the impact if we decarbonize, the impact on the social metrics or on the social aspect of decarbonization? It's just helpful to just look at those side by side and perhaps look at priorities and then maybe take it from there. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very useful in terms of what we focus on, and it may be in our best interest to prioritize. I just want to check any more. Because you've been very silent. Oh, I'm gonna come to you just now. And then, okay. Because you've been very silent. I was never gonna let you sit in a meeting without saying anything because you've had the Komati experience. And I know there's a lot that's going on from the ESCOM side, especially around fruit flare, and you're seeing what we don't necessarily see, right? And you're in the thick of it. So I'd be keen to hear your thoughts and your reflections around what it is that we're trying to do here today. And then I'll take the two ladies' contribution.
I did intend commenting, but perhaps later.
there's a few observations from my side. One important point that hasn't been discussed so far is the importance of place in the transition. In your presentation earlier, Lebogang, you spoke about job creation, you spoke about job losses and creation, and you had the graph where you had on the bottom end, it was job losses, and on top you had C&I and O&M jobs. We very often see that being put forward as the renewables changing the landscape as such. But getting back to place, what we find is that when you build large-scale renewables in Mpumalanga, you don't offset the jobs that you lose simply from renewables. There has to be a push for economic diversification. Now, we've spoken about that to some extent in the discussion, but it comes back to perhaps a certain level of forced transition in Mpumalanga, because there may be other places in the country that are better positioned to have or to offer manufacturing benefits across the value chain. We spoke briefly this morning about transformer manufacturing as an example. There are some companies that have been established in Gauteng that do transformer manufacturing. But there must be some mechanism that we have to utilize to promote manufacturing, reindustrialization in Mpumalanga, to perhaps even cross-subsidize those businesses so that you do address the place concern that I've raised. Because if you don't, you have a high risk of establishing ghost towns. So what we've been doing as a JET office in Eskom is looking, while we are pursuing as an organization large-scale renewables, we're trying to look at the utilization of our existing infrastructure to support the local economy, to support diversification, and we have a wide range of initiatives that wouldn't typically be seen as an Eskom initiative, but we're doing it because nobody else is doing it. And that was a key lesson that we've learned from Komati as well. Komati was, the shutdown of Komati wasn't done in isolation, and it wasn't done by Eskom alone. It was communicated widely as part of the IRP 2010 and the draft versions of the IRPs that followed. And there were a number of engagements regarding the shutdown, regarding the energy transition plans as well. But nobody paid heed to the warnings, right? And when the station was eventually did shut down, it became an Eskom issue. And unfortunately, it became an Eskom issue. And it's still seen as an Eskom failure as such, without taking into consideration that the mine that was supporting that power station had shut down several years prior, without having any transition plans in place. So again, I want to emphasize the importance of place in the energy transition and focusing specifically around the power stations, because that's where you have your biggest risk as such. I'm supportive of the idea of not making your code of practice binding, because I don't see any value in a binding code of practice, especially around something like this. It has to be encouraging, because on the one hand, while you are looking at addressing social norms or social challenges, you are also looking at the impact of climate change, and you don't want to disincentivize companies from pursuing a low carbon future by having binding conditions associated with what has been presented. And another point that I intended bringing up much later was the importance of partnerships. So we haven't really spoken about about the issue of partnerships much in this conversation, but I think it is something that has to come up in your code of practice, is the importance of public-private partnerships and various other forms of partnerships, because no single entity can implement the transition in isolation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Vikesh. And this is what we reflected on in the previous roundtables around the fact that when Komati happened, the responsibility of a just transition then was on Eskom's table. No local municipality participation, no local business. Well, it's not much local business that can happen. Especially when there was the decommissioning. But the code is at the heart trying to get that partnership going by outlining clear roles and responsibilities up front, so that we don't get to a situation where when we have to go through another decommissioning, the the fingers are all pointed at ESCOM to usher in a just transition, because you have a very defined business model. And what we're asking you to do lies outside of that. So it's really the thinking that we've had around this code of corporate, and also doing this. I mean, I know the new IRP talks about delayed decommissioning, but we also need to take into consideration, you know, power stations are linked to a particular economic lifespan. And we're going to run into the same thing in the next couple of years. And what a tool of this nature does, especially in the ESCOM example, Vikesh, for me, is we've been using a term, it levels the playing field, and there is clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities and expectations. So people were coming to you saying they were expecting this from you, whereas that was not even practical to begin with. So here everybody knows what we were supposed to do, so that when it goes wrong, it's not a finger pointing exercise again. Because at the end of the day, when we point fingers at each other, it doesn't change the fact that, you know, we've got Komati village and what's happened has transpired, because everybody is trying to shift the blame and look much better in the process. So this is the spirit in which the code is being established. And we hear your points around the non-binding nature of it and making it more of an encouragement tool. And I'll Lisa, you will come back on that. I don't know if Paul is on the line. But you can come in on what the code can help us achieve. Can I take your hand, and then you over there, and then you want to say something, and then Lisa, I'm gonna come straight to you.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. I see there's another. I think one of the things, I'll speak mostly on skills development. And there's a stigma from especially us South Africans that we don't want to work in neighboring countries. And I don't know for what reason, because they are developing like there's no tomorrow. And I've never been in a plane where I've seen more than 10 South Africans going to other countries, but you'll see internationals from Europe, everywhere else, coming into those areas. You know, look at the hydro facilities in the Zambezi, the Congo River Basin, Inga project. Those are massive projects where you can get a lot of skills. We are going to the Uganda engagement this Thursday. It was almost full when we booked, almost to this brim. And these are massive projects where people can get skills. I'm not sure, and I want to add from a partnerships point of view to say maybe this different countries partnership is needed. We need to cross borders, South Africans, for us to understand what is happening in other countries. You go to Mozambique, they've got their most, I think, second with Zambia, TDP. After this 14,000 kilometers, you'll need a job. You will need to go work in Namibia. You will need to go work in other countries. You cannot only work in South Africa. And I think that's something that we need to kill as professionals, you know, of maybe we're competing for jobs, I don't know, but there's so many projects that are happening cross-border. You look at the Lubida Corridor project, I mean, that rail. Right now, if you're a rail engineer, where are you going to work in South Africa? There's no rail project that is coming up. But if you go to Angola, you know, or Zambia, you get a job in rail and you get the experience. The time South Africa gets the master plan in terms of rail, we have those skills in the country. And I want to respond to the gentleman as well. And I'm in agreement with you. If you look at the TDP right now, it's 80% European, 80%. Why? Because we cannot develop those skills here. We don't have them because we've never went to another country to learn it. And by right, you know, if you're a business person, you need an answer now. And not that Europeans are doing anything wrong. No, they have the skill that we need now. So meaning, how then do we develop ourselves that the next round of TDP, we are ready? Is definitely to go to other countries and learn. And we need to remove that as much as possible from our South African minds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I take your input?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charlotte Jessica Rapasad. I am from Green Glasses Environmental Communications Consultancy, that mouthful. That's me. I work at the intersection of communication, sustainability, and climate education, specifically in schools. I've learned to pivot, and I think I just want to bring some of my observations from schools into this room. And I think most importantly, I just have to mention that I am a climate activist. So I always see things through the lens of climate activism because when we talk about a just transition, it's not just about looking at it from the policy perspective. We have to look at it from the environmental and the social, and obviously it's coming back to ESG. So what I actually made notes so I don't ramble too much. I mean, us in comms can speak for years and years. But just what the lady said about skills development, if I could just let you know a bit about my experience with regards to that. Our country sometimes I feel is a tad close-minded and it limits opportunities. At the time when I needed to do my MSc, going to, I'm not, okay, let me just mention the university. It is here. It's like if you go to WITS, hypothetically, but it was a true story. If you go to them, it's very rigid. You have to have 1, 2, 3. And I come there and say, look, I do have 1, 2, 3, but you want 3.5 and you're not willing to budge. And then I had to go out of the country and now I'm studying, I'm doing my MSc at the University of Sussex in London. I'm paying like a hell of a lot of money. Again, but there's a lot of flexibility in how they look at it. They looked at people needing to pivot and how we needed interconnectiveness between different faculties to bring that education into the climate space. And I think for me, that worked amazingly. What SA could have taken from that, I think, is not be so rigid. I do meet all of the criteria that they needed. However, they are a bit close-minded when it comes to skills development. What I've also learned while studying with an international cohort is that qualification specifically brings people from different countries together. So I always have practical knowledge and hearing what's happening in Brazil and what's happening in different parts of the world that can be implemented here. And it makes a very good course. So that's from the skills development perspective. And one of the cases that I did go through, as I think Vikesh did mention about ESCOM and Komati, that was one of the case studies. And the one for the Mpumalanga's just transition, that was something that as of recent I did research on. So it's amazing to look at how close-minded some of our educational facilities offer us education and skills development as opposed to abroad. And I think that also limits us in terms of keeping, maybe from an economic point of view, we're taking loads of money for our education and moving them into countries abroad who are willing to accept us. And amazingly enough, with regards to just looking at what there is to offer, we have a lot of educational possibilities here, but we are too rigid and we are not on par with the rest of the world. And that's going to limit us, as you said, rightfully said, it's going to limit us as we need those skills to go into the just transition. Also, when it comes to the communication aspect, I think the jargon that we use, it's not conducive for our communities. And I have to say that quite blatantly, and I'm saying it unapologetically as well. We speak about a just transition in a language that is not conducive for our communities. People or those that are out of the space don't understand what we're actually saying. And yes, it does come across like I'm losing my job, I'm losing my home, my family is going to be destitute, because we are not trying to break it down into a language that is understandable for everybody. So we're all on par. And I think if I look at an example of COVID, everybody knew about COVID. Yes, we were all not medical doctors, but everybody could say something about COVID because there was not too much of misinformation once the right communication was sent out. And I think that's something that needs to be done. Also, I think, and lastly, what I want to say as well is when it comes to opportunities for smaller business, we do get overlooked. It is something that happens all the time because you maybe want an international consultancy or you want something that has 5 or 10 or 15 people. But if you look at me, I'm one person. I'm doing the most because I can and I'm quite passionate about it. And I understand, most importantly, this is our country. So I understand what I can't say broadly, but I do have a very good understanding of what our people is like, what our culture is like, how we speak, how we converse, how we get on, how we would disagree, and how we would bridge that gap. So I think looking at smaller businesses who have that passion, who have that edge, much like myself, and the expertise and experience to carry forth is very important in the just transition. As a climate activist, I cannot emphasize this enough. There is a disconnect between how we look at sustainability from a personal and operational perspective against operational goals. There's a distinction between the two, and it shouldn't be. We should be leading by example. And I think it holds true to something as simple as the environment. It is non-renewable. If we're going to break down, we cannot just go through degrading our environment to a point where we come back and say, look, we've done the just transition, we've saved jobs, we've created jobs, but we've killed off the environment. We kill that environment, it's not renewable. So I think that needs to lay there at the back of our head at every turn. And the more we educate people, I think the better. We drive that awareness forward, people are understanding of what it is. I have a children's book on climate change, and I'm laughing about it because it sounds kind of salesy, but it's not that. It's just that when I go out, I realize if I can bring this down to a level of a 5-year-old, that I'm actually getting 2 markets at the same time because it's a parent that needs to read that book. So I've created the book with the teacher parent resources because I've also understood with my experience that parents don't understand fully what climate change is, and they just know the Googled one-liner that comes up right at the top of it. So I think we need further education to drive that forward. And maybe going forward, the last thing, this is absolute last closing, I promise. I think, like I say, it's a simple actions. I do see, and this is a climate activist in me, I do see the plastic bottles on the table. But again, it comes from, if we look at it holistically and not just from one point of view, it is business, it is everything all in one, and we're not a silo movement. The sooner we the sooner we look at it that way without saying, someone's picking on us, it actually highlights, we should give due consideration if we are speaking about climate, because that is happening right now. So we need to act right now. And Lebo, I think it is, I think it would be very encouraging for all of us, I mean, as a society, once we understand, where the code of good practice would come in, when the implementation would take place, and like the reviews, to understand the efficacy of it. So with that, thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'd also be interested in seeing that children's book as well. Quite interested. I saw there were 2 last hands. So this and 2. Is there another one? Okay. Sorry. In fact, can I start with Sean and then we take your hands and then we will hand back to Lisa.
Rankans Lebo. Abagan Tavides, Tita Tribe. My name is Sean McDonald. Before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of these lands that is being discussed here. I am the founder of the first indigenous strategic advisory company in the Republic of South Africa and engaged from an indigenous perspective, more so indigenous rights perspective. Appreciate the information that was shared today. I'm going to refer to something that Peter said earlier. The just transition is going to open up this country to things that was not addressed in the past 30 years. When our sister from the IDC spoke about the design of the economy 8 or so years ago, where we are at now again, the majority of the people in this country was excluded. At the moment now, the current or the indigenous peoples of this country are being excluded still. I say so because as an indigenous business, we are battling. We are not being recognized. Okay, that's from a a country perspective, that work is being addressed. But from a business perspective, the corporation has been engaging corporate South Africa over the past 3 or 4 years. We got an endorsement letter from the PCC about 2 years ago to host the first Indigenous Climate and Energy Conference in this country. 2 years later, we are still unable to attract sufficient funding to host an event, not the project, an event. And so there's not a lot of interest out there when the sister speaks about awareness. If you go into indigenous communities, they don't know about this transition. If you look at the focus of, yes, there's a key focus now on Mpumalanga. The mineral sector is moving towards the Northern Cape. And the Northern Cape is filled with Khoi and San people. These people are at the moment already being excluded. Projects that are coming in, people from other provinces are being brought in and excluding the local communities, the indigenous peoples. So from that perspective, I would like to again raise awareness around this. A lot of the, I appreciate that at ILO is easier because this work also addresses your frameworks, your policies. We are still battling to have ILO 169 ratified in this country. So if the ILO is busy with this type of work, we are expecting also the inclusion of the indigenous peoples to be part of the work. One of the things that I've been speaking to the PCC, or initially when I began to engage the PCC, it was around mitigation. As soon as the indigenous peoples are going to wake up around their rights, you're going to encounter a problem. It is happening internationally. And so the foresight is being lacked here. And so we've been attempting to include the indigenous voice for the past 2 years. But I'd just like to raise awareness now again. This year we are upping our work within the space. And we are covering multiple aspects. The opportunities are there. Like I say, if you look at indigenous energy companies, for example, in the USA and Canada, but especially in the USA, we are engaging internationally. The indigenous businesses there are outperforming non-indigenous businesses, and the industry is taking note of this. So more and more input is being sought from indigenous peoples. That is why COP is becoming more and more a focus area, especially the inclusion of indigenous peoples. So I just want to bring attention to that. As a indigenous business, we are not even included in the discussion yet. So just to take to be aware of that. But one of the things I want to address on that is that one of the focus areas that we engage is around the quality of life. We can look at the different areas in the country and what needs to happen, but we don't focus as a country on the metric of quality of life. And if we use that as a yardstick, it would be much easier. But if you then, for example, if you're able to quantify what a comfortable lifestyle will be, right? Then that figure you can attach into every household, and just from that you can then see how we can. Let's use example in Kombagas, for example, a mine goes up, right? That mine must ensure that the quality of life of the community raises, not just the mine or individuals from the community. So just I want to advocate for quality of life as a yardstick here. Yeah, Gans.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Sean. When I'm in meetings with Sean, he is usually you're more robust, and I'm not used to this version of you, by the way. But thanks for raising the points that you're raising. Also important to take these into considerations. We're wanting to expand the grid. We're going to run into communities, indigenous people's land. And let me just say, even for a country like the United States, who's doing their own grid expansion program, because they haven't followed due process and they're not taking communities' rights and their rights to their land seriously. They've run into serious problems in terms of grid expansion. It's almost come to a halt. So what Sean is raising is really, you don't just rip through communities expanding a grid. There's issues related to tenure, there's issues related to land rights, as well as the rights of the indigenous people of that land. And this point, Sean, around the quality of life of the community, it goes to the point of the fact that we need to think about this new era of development as different to the previous one, because we can't replicate the injustices of the past where there's a huge mining houses, but there's informal settlements surrounding it. When that precious resource is just going to be bussed or is going to be trucked to the ports, and it's going to come back to us, and we wouldn't have benefited much from it. So it's, like was said earlier, we're dealing with a number of challenges all at the same time, but also being mindful of these issues and bringing it into the experience of the Code of Good Practice is really important. And thank you for bringing up Convention 169 for us to take into consideration. You're right, it has not been ratified. Can I take the last two hands? And then we hand over. We are running out of time. I want to let you out of here before we. Okay, so it's three. If I can ask that it be brief so that we can give Lisa an opportunity to respond. Can I start with you?
Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Charles Mkunu, popularly known as Sir Charles. I'm from taxi industry. I've got two main points. The main point number one is the issue of priorities. The following need to be prioritized where we are talking about green jobs. We are talking about just transition. We are transitioning to green economy. So we need to reconsider the type of jobs that we are offering. So the jobs that we are offering need to be green jobs. So green jobs speak to sustainability, inclusivity, skills development, decent work, as well as stakeholder engagement, which is very, very much key. We cannot actually transition without having an engagement with stakeholders. Now, even the students are also stakeholders because they have their own mind about their own environment as to how it should be. Remember, the green jobs starts from the green manufacturing and green purchasing. There's a program we ran back in the years about green purchasing. Green purchasing has to do with you when you are buying your groceries for your house. You buy things that are packaged in recyclable materials instead of buying with any other, so that they can see, the industry can see that these things are no longer useful for us to use. We need to use recyclable materials because people are not buying and they end up expiring. So that's how we are toy-toying. It's a better way of toy-toying. Those are the key principles in terms of green jobs, the creation of green jobs. The next one is the issue of entrepreneurship. This is the guideline. Now, when we get to the guidelines, we need to actually guide communities on how they can actually, because we need the buy-in from all the communities for them to receive this and champion it at the grassroots through the national dialogue, through the dialogue on the grassroots at the ward level, and then up to etc. And then we also speak of the fair labor practices. Some people, they don't even know what is a fair labor practice. We need to bring it down to the language, like you were saying, that the jargon we are using is scaring people away. So we need to tone down and start using the language they are used to, so that they can understand what is fair labor practices. And one last thing, we need to have a monitoring and evaluation strategy where we are able to monitor and evaluate our efforts from ward level all the way up to the national level. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Charles. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Lisa for that session we had just before lunch. That was a very good one, where you make mention, you said best practices bring stability. You know, she's also said just transaction. It also talks about good choices. And the good choices stuck in my mind. I said, okay, we do have the current government, but however, she also mentioned something very, very important, that this side cannot go beyond the legislation, which is also very important. But however, the good choices, is it possible for you to question, okay, in a very polite way, or for you to have I don't know how you can do this. We have a very good budget, a very long speech, but do you have a way of questioning it? No, maybe just find out, because, before the budget, there is a motive behind. What is the motive for the budget? For example, the 350, or now 370 at a 20 rand. Oh, but why can't you build a factory with those 350s and have many people working for a very long time, where they are empowered, where they can feed their family for long? I mean, I don't know how you can engage with them in these things, because we need a country where we have citizens that are accountable. I'll tell you one thing about the problem of South Africa: it's the mindset. You go to the location, where's the problem? The mindset. We are entitled. We have a feeling of entitlement in South Africa. Your government will take care of you. They'll have grant. If not grant, they'll give you RDP. Your children will go to school for free. And you feel you're entitled, and you still code, because of. But I think that's where, if ever this session was to be very proactive, it's to tap in the mindset. The problem with South Africans is the mindset. You can't solve the problem in the rural area or in the location where they feel entitled. I think we need something to, somebody has to really, be accountable. I was learning from a friend saying, what, in my country, we're not used to this. Instead we said, how can we give to our government? Not where we are always in the receiving end, but talk to another ordinary South Africa will remind you of the 19 what. So what I'm trying to say, I didn't want to go there. What I want to say, guys, is I think the first problem, the big problem, is the mind. So whatever intervention, the mind is the problem.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got the last intervention, and then I really need to give it back to Lisa.
All right, very good afternoon, colleagues. Kondwani Kaonga from Terror Services. Food for thought, colleagues, is that we sitting in this platform discussing how we improve the labor aspect during this transition or change, and the point at which it's taken from, it's as if it's a new space. I don't know if there's any economists in this room, but if we look at cyclical economic events, the just transition is one thereof. What I mean by that is that if you look at, for example, mining in Gauteng, the gold mining value chain of that, mines are closing down, meaning that we've got ghost mining towns that require revitalization. From a scale of economy, that is similar to what is happening with the just transition. So now, bringing it, the list goes on. I can give multiple examples of where major economic or cyclic turns have happened, and people have adjusted accordingly to those cyclical turns. And that is how we need to face the JET program in essence. So now, we sitting in this platform, all smart individuals from different entities. Well, we speak smart, we present smart, we're talking critical points of discussion. However, it's only a small component of stakeholders in this room, right? So now, if we're discussing the JET and the Department of Environmental Fisheries and Forestry is not in this room, how do we get to the implementation part of it? SA is very good at developing documentation, right? We're very good, but when it gets to the ground, that cannot be implemented. So now, the reason why I brought in the DFFE is that the DFFE have a screening tool, an environmental screening tool. And that environmental screening tool raises impacts you are likely to face in a project area. And as part of that, we will not pick up social impact on that screening tool. Meaning that in whatever community, regardless of the economic status, project developers are not advised that they need to factor in the social aspect of it. So now, in as much as we sitting in this platform providing an input, but the key stakeholders to actually drive the implementation of this program are not in this room. Entities like the DFFE, the mining sector is still undergoing their own transition and revitalization of ghost mining towns. So I'll put a pin on that point, and I'd like to draw the table to another point of that. We sort of almost hitting the pinpoint of addressing the labor component of the just transition, but we're not looking at the various business cases across multiple regions that will drive the need for labor and employment. In as much as we sit and raise comments in terms of how the private sector is not coming on board to employ people, there's a business case component that we need to appreciate. In various industries, what are the trends that are currently happening? Meaning that if we identify the trends happening, I need to be agile as a business. To run a business is competitive advantage is a people. Meaning that if we are agile to adapt to the trends that are coming, it means that even businesses are put in a position to upskill graduates, noting the trends that are coming within that industry. So, Chair, in summary, I believe that we need to go back to the drawing board and have proper people in this platform, because we currently working in silos. I think a week or so ago, when a Gauteng engagement, which was pretty much discussing similar concepts around public-private partnerships. And we need that integrated stakeholder alignment for this to be implemented. Other than that, it will just be another document that I'll reference when I write my report. Thank you.
Please don't make it part of your additional documents too. So this is why we went the route of the code of good practice, because it's a bit of a step up from ordinary documents, and depending on whether it's binding or encouraging, it provides a useful sort of guidance in terms of how to approach this transition. So it has a bit of a better status than just a normal policy recommendation. I will get into a way forward slide, which just shows you how the DFFE and all the other implementing partners come back. This is more for us to receive more information, insights from yourself as we move towards the actual development of the code. Lisa, you don't have to respond to everything, and I'll ask that you don't respond to everything. But if there are like specific things you want to touch on, please. This is more to give us insights to firm up our process.
Yeah, no, thanks everybody for their comments. I think they were very useful. Hopefully, to borrow from the lady over there, we've been able to tap into all your mindsets. And in terms of what the last speaker said, yes, this is one consultation amongst others, and we need to make sure that there is greater inclusivity and alignment with different instruments. So if I listen to what everyone was saying here and what we can take forward, that the scope of this code, yes, is about the climate crisis, but by doing it, it can provide leadership for a broader range of transitions, including maybe the AI kind of environment, that it needs to be multi-layered. It needs to be very inclusive, including Indigenous people and including the impact, the point that was made about transmission and communities that are going to be affected by transition. So, we've got to look at all instances. It's to be successful, it must be counterintuitive and not only think it's about coal miners. I think that's what I learned today. And the responsible people can't just be Eskom or coal miners. There's a broader set of people who are responsible. There was a strong call for encouraging flexible, agile, and I think we'll take that into account. I think the good thing also, Lebo and Matilda, is that Carmel and Renee are doing a complementary vehicle, like a toolkit. So we can provide the guidance, but the how-to, and the how-to maybe even Carmel in different situations, can come into the work that you're doing. Yes, I think also we need to take into account the importance of bottom-up, the importance of prioritizing, the importance of space, the importance of partnership, and the importance of language. And again, that might be the difference between the work we do and the work Carmel does, is that it can be more accessible. But, for code, there's got to be some legalese, because it's got to be authoritative. And then I just think one specific proposal, which I think I didn't raise, this thing about, it was raised by two of you, about skills and the region. And in fact, in the detail of my document, I make reference to a proposal from B20, which said that to move to renewable, there needs to be a regional matching scheme, precisely because of the reason that you said, is that you can't train, if you train only South Africans for South Africa, they will go to Zimbabwe, and then we'll lose them. But if you have a regional scheme, then you can keep the skills and you can tell somebody in the DRC where there are opportunities in South Africa. Now, when I raised that with organized labor, they said, oh, no. But I pointed out to them that a regional matching scheme, and it's something that we should explore, and it'd be great to talk to you more, is not only for the skilled workers, but even for the unskilled workers. Because while coal might go down in certain parts of Mpumalanga, there's still coal mines for export, hopefully not to Israel, that is going to be being built in Zimbabwe. So this regional matching may not, it's very important for skilled workers, and they are a constituency, but might also apply more broadly. And then the last provocation. So the lady over there said, we must practice what we preach. Yeah. And I think that is an important thing. Okay, but now, now that says Aquila, but I've been to many places where there's been water bottles, and it's a local SMME company that is providing the water bottles. So part of, and we'll have to think about it, practicing what you preach is how to do the just transition, even for SMMEs who might be providing water bottles. So it's it's complicated, and that's part of the complexity that we need to keep engaging on as we go forward. Thanks, Lebo. Sure, he's online, but I think he said he thinks he's covered.
He's covered, okay. Whether it becomes encouragement or enforcement, I think is a subject for the next sort of discussions on the code. Is my way forward slide ready? Gone fishing. All right, there you go. Thank you. All right, so thanks, colleagues. We got exactly what we wanted to get out of this session. This has been really rich inputs for us as we take this conversation forward. So in the room, I'm hearing a mix between yes, code, but encouraging, as well as let's be agile. Let's also focus on the supplementary sort of practical guidance and instruments that can help guide the process along. That's what's come out, and to be quite honest, it's come out from the 3 previous engagements that we've had before. So this project is meant to run for a year. We've started with the roundtable discussions. We are going to get towards a process where we do develop a draft code, because I think what's also going to be beneficial, in line with the comment that was made, is to see what we're actually proposing on paper. It also helps to alleviate some of the anxieties. What you'll find is that the things that we are suggesting in terms of best practice, they're already taking place at company level. That's what you'll find. I mean, we've had interesting discussions with colleagues who are working on green hydrogen. So like I said, seeing something could be of great benefit. And I mean, we're open to keep having conversations with colleagues. How we would like to have this process, and this is why we're here at NADLEC, is to subject this process to a discussion, dialogue, and negotiation and at NADLEC, which represents business, community, labor, as well as government, to discuss at a practical level what the minimum standards should be. And our executive director, when she started the meeting with her opening reflections, she mentioned that these are also important instruments because they are sending a signal. I mean, they are interested partners that are looking at the South African case, and it does send a signal that we are interested from a collaboration point of view to move this transition forward. But secondly, what it also does do is that it provides at least practical guidance for business. So what I've seen is that there's businesses who are doing great things, but because this is not a shared practice across business, it creates a bit of, it creates problems, and then the inertia comes back again. Because why should a business incur, extra costs doing things right when another business doesn't have the obligation to do the exact same thing? And it creates unnecessary cracks, and then the inertia creeps up again. Hence, I asked the question, how do we solve for this inertia problem that's sort of creeping up? So, but those conversations will happen at a NADLEC level. And we are interested, by the way, in continuously having consultations with the public and various stakeholders on this. We hope to finalize a draft on the code, as well as the supporting sort of synthesis reports and toolkits. We did say Carmel and Renee are currently working on that. And we'd like to finalize with this process by the end of the year. So it's an iterative process of doing some work, getting some feedback on what we've come up with, subjecting it to NADLEC discussions, and continuously having a feedback loop to see if, at least at a minimum level, we're not creating an additional burden, but rather harmonizing how just transition application is happening at a workplace level, and how we're embedding this, again, so that the roles and responsibilities are clear and not at an onerous level, but the roles and responsibilities are clear and in a practical way. We're creating a level of harmonization to ensure that just transition principles are embedded within organization. And if I listen to colleagues who work on ESG, it sounds like this is stuff that's already happening. So it's also quite interesting to kind of like do this work. The IDC is looking at, requiring certain things from companies to do if they are wanting investment from them. This also, again, just makes sure that the rules are known early in advance, so that you're not nitpicking in terms of who you choose to prioritize for investment vis-a-vis the other. So that is, in a nutshell, the process that we want to follow with this process. We're going to close off this session in a way that we didn't close off the others. Yeah, this process has been one surprise after the other. But I'm going to invite you, Munya, to take there's no stage. Just imagine that there is a stage. To take the floor. So Munya Touch is going to recite a poem for us, and you're going to keep it PG. I get away live streaming. Okay, great. All right, take it away, Munya.
So this poem is called Our Actions. Climate change is not hocus pocus. It's a reality demanding focus. From icy peaks to ocean's flow, we are the architects of this upheaval, but still, we choose to ignore. Locusts, where the cause is made by us sons and daughters, yet we tend to lose the focus by being in denial, but we all experience the current weather focus. Our actions are the cause of it. Yes, we are the cause of it. If you look around, weather patterns are shifting. Seasons are no longer in sync. Yet we're here, drifting in denial as the world begins to shrink. We must conscientize each other, awakening from this slumber. For if we don't act, if we don't care, we risk perishing, drowning in our despair. Our actions are the cause of it. Yes, we are the cause of it. Let's rally together, break this chain, take action, ignite change before it's too late, before we feel the pain. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.